Here's a tighter, cleaner rewrite that keeps the intent and ramps up clarity and pace. 3 weeks after leaving the capital, Asher was back at the Wargrave estate, and his name was everywhere. Nobles and commoners traded stories. He'd sandbagged his strength. He'd always been a prodigy. He'd slain 1,000 Emoviri the day he awakened. Rumors grew legs and ran. Inside the estate, nothing changed. No praise. No rewards. Not even from Azarin, who'd made a fortune off his 10th son's performance. Wargraves didn't celebrate winning. Victory was the baseline. Still, the suns and moons were rattled, even if they wouldn't say it. Only Azarin, watching from afar, and the first training ground instructors truly knew how far Asher had gone. In those 3 weeks, he hammered every front, body to its limit, lightning control, Astra control, steady pressure on his life rank. Day in, day out. No slippage. Tomorrow was his first monster subjugation in the first ground. Tonight, he was where he preferred to be, trading steel with Clinton, the only instructor who could still push him. He'd stopped sparring with students. There was no point in holding back to gain experience from weaker blades when the source stood right there. When Clinton was busy, Asher hunted knowledge from the sidelines. Harold for raw power refined into precision. Aloan for footwork and application. Virek for deeper Astra usage, watching the man's energy like a hawk. As for the 3 top-ranked 17-year-olds, he cut through them without effort. Ryan had looked helpless before. These 3 fared worse. Steel boomed. 2 figures met and vanished, reappearing across the ground in bursts of speed. Sound chased sparks as their paths stitched the courtyard with light. Their exchanges were clean, measured, relentless, intent baked into every cut. Clinton's face stayed neutral, his black eyes tracking Asher as if reading a diagram. He blocked, slid, parried, countered, fluid as a dancer on an invisible beat. Across 3 weeks, he hadn't corrected Asher once. He let the boy's talent find its line. Asher's violet gaze never left him, hungry to devour whatever could be stolen by sight alone. Clinton allowed it, feeding that hunger was part of the work, and the progress showed. That never meant parity. More than once, Clinton had bounced Asher like a rag doll. Injuries piled up. That was the price. Pain was part of the curriculum. Now Asher's body shook with fatigue. Sweat ran. Breath controlled itself in smooth counts. Muscles burned. Limbs ached. His eyes stayed steady. A shadow bloomed overhead. Clinton's broadsword fell like a dropped anvil. Asher met it a hair late. Virilis snapped up, caught the weight, and the shock rattled him to one knee. He rolled, and the follow-up strike split air where his ribs had been. The next cut chased his flank. His feet saved him barely. Steel-kissed skin, a red line opened. Neither spoke. Their blades handled the conversation. Asher pressed back. Virilis darted in a staccato of thrusts. Clinton brushed them aside as if batting away rain, then drew a line for Asher's chest and stopped just shy. "Good work today," Clinton said at last, studying the small monster in front of him. "Thank you, sir," Asher answered, swaying but upright. He knew the cycle: collapse, sleep, restore, repeat. Monster subjugation starts tomorrow. Good hunting, 10th Sunday. Thank you for your guidance, instructor. He turned for the exit. Each step felt like dragging a mountain, but he didn't slow. "Isn't it basically cheating at this point, 10th son?" A voice called. He didn't need to look. "Ella," one of the talented trio. "It's the Wargrave blood," Asher said, smiling. "We'll finally see you in subjugation." Another voice added, "Tom, the second of the 3. Want a few tips?" Asher shook his head. "No need. I'll watch and learn from the instructors." Tom smiled and fell in beside him. He'd push himself hard, too. Having a son on the field had driven the 3 of them more than they'd expected. Over the last 3 weeks, the trio had drifted closer to Asher. At first they kept their distance. He was a Sunday. But after a few brief, polite exchanges and the occasional smile, their guard dropped. "Who's patching you up every day?" the last of them asked. "I know the Wargraves have healers, but at this rate the Duke should be at Clinton's throat." Hito. He understood Wargraves were built on battle and glory, but Asher's routine still felt unreal. daily spars with Clinton, injuries that would floor most people, and then he'd show up the next morning good as new. It was by design. Asher had asked Clinton to target every gap he saw and to make the lessons stick. Painful, never lethal. Pain teaches. Real opponents don't forgive openings. And the pre-march had already left the estate, according to Lyra. It's fine. This is my path, Asher said as they stepped out into the cooling stone courtyard. As long as I don't lose a limb or hit a vital, the family won't step in. Monster in human skin, Hito deadpanned. Just don't drop dead near me. I don't want a murder charge. I'm still young and still a virgin. Ella and Tom snorted, then waved. Good night, 10th Sunday. They peeled off with Hito in tow. Asher watched them go, a small smile tugging at his mouth, then turned the other way. A short walk brought him to a bare stone clearing where nothing grew. He stopped. Bring it, Lyra. She appeared seconds later, silent as a shadow, and with her, a trembling beast pinned under her aura. It didn't dare growl. Asher stepped forward. Virilis formed in his hand. One clean thrust through skull and brain. No scream. Crimson Pact answered. Blood rose and sank into the rapier. Virilis stayed silver, as if refusing to be stained by something so low. Warmth spread through Asher's body. Skin knit, muscle sealed. In moments the damage was gone. Thank you, he said. It's my duty, young master. Lyra bowed and set to work, clearing blood and carcass with practiced ease. This was his nightly treatment. No estate healers. And he wasn't telling Ella, Tom, or Hito how he did it. He didn't walk back. Silver light flashed, position marker, and he was in his room. Sweat-soaked clothes off, quick shower, fresh change. Comfort rolled in. He sat on the bed, then let himself fall back, eyes on the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to the other life. No training, no fighting, no constant ache. Just classes, friends, and Jennifer. The orphanage came next. Unlike most, Ethan had never looked for his parents. He shut that door. Jennifer had urged him to try, but he'd stayed unmoved. I wonder how she is now, he thought. I hope she found someone better. Even resting, he kept cultivating. Astra threaded through his veins, shoring up muscle, bone, and channels. He'd grown tired of lotus posture sessions. Too limiting. After 2 weeks of trial and error, he learned to pull Astra without sitting still. Now he could cultivate while walking or lying down, so long as he wasn't moving wildly. Everyone absorbed Astra passively after awakening. Active cultivation was just speeding the process with intent. I wonder what tomorrow's subjugation will be like, he thought, smiling. He'd killed beasts on the road to and from the capital, but training was different. There's always more to learn. A few wins don't make a war god. He exhaled, let the last thought settle, and whispered, status.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Asher scanned his system with a smile on his face. Within a month, he had broken through another 2 minor life ranks. But he knew that when he made another breakthrough to the next major life rank, Kindlestar, his cultivation speed would significantly slow down. His strength and agility had both increased by 11 points, while his perception and vitality increased only by a single point. Perception and vitality are really hard to increase, Asher thought to himself. It also seems like each minor rank adds 5 points to my strength and agility. Asher continued mentally. The extra 1 point comes from breaking the limit of my body. But isn't 1 point a bit too little? Asher couldn't help but complain silently. He sighed and rose from his bed the next second. Lyra was already there with dinner. He wanted to just eat and get back to training. The Wargrave's true awakening would be happening in 5 months, and he couldn't afford to waste any time at all. After eating, Asher climbed into his bed and dozed off. He had been pushed his limits during the sparring session earlier, and he needed sleep before he could continue again. Within these 3 weeks, Asher's lightning control had shown tremendous results. He could now coat Virilis in lightning just like he did with himself. His lightning could now take various shapes. This was one of the reasons he was eager to get into the monster subjugation training quickly, so he could test the results of his training from this past month. The hours slipped by as Asher slept. He woke up by 1 a.m. in the morning and immediately resumed his training. He had 5 full hours of personal training before the main training session began at 7 a.m. With Asher's focused look, the sound of thunder echoed once in a while as he trained, his Astra control deepening. Sweat clung to his skin once again, his muscles tightening as he honed his movements. Hours passed, and Asher prepared to head to the first training ground once more. The drill went on, and soon evening started to arrive, bringing with it the time for monster subjugation. Your first time in a monster subjugation training. I wonder how the 10th son will perform. Ella spoke with amusement as she walked beside Asher. Beside both of them were Hito and Tom, who walked with their hands in their pockets quietly. Walking through a corridor, they arrived at a space larger than the weapons training ground. Trees rose and spiraled outwards, forming a dome-like shape. A man could be seen sitting mid-air, as if the air itself suspended him in place. Anthony looked around. He could see former trainees like him. All of them had qualified after the 1-month weapons training session. Drake, the monster subjugation instructor, opened his eyes and turned to face them. "It seems we have some new faces with us," he spoke. His voice was calm, but neither firm nor authoritative. It was simply flat. "I will explain what happens during this training. Just as the name implies, you are here to kill monsters. I won't teach you or guide you. You're to learn through the art of battle and injuries. I will only interfere if any of you are about to die or receive serious injuries. Aside from that, expect nothing more from me," Drake said flatly and lazily. "You're speechless, right?" Tom's voice came from behind, sounding gentle in Asher's ears. Asher was indeed speechless. He had expected some form of instructions, but the instructor was throwing them straight into battle and letting them learn through pain. It was certainly an effective method, but these were still kids. "I shouldn't use Earth standards for Crimora. People here are built differently." Asher reminded himself mentally that everyone here was a superhuman. From within the trees, a man stepped out and bowed towards Instructor Drake. The man didn't speak and just stood there as if he were awaiting instructions. "Daniel." "Whisper." Drake's voice came as he remained floating midair. The trainee, named Daniel, stepped forward when his name was called. The man bowing behind Drake vanished. Within seconds, he reappeared with a whisper-ranked beast beside him. Asher simply watched from the side, deep in thought. It seems names are called out, and then the rank of the beast is revealed. It didn't seem like Daniel's first rodeo as he moved backward, a bow in hand as he knocked arrows at the monster. The beast, a snake, slithered out of the way, easily dodging the arrow as it instantly rushed toward Daniel. But Daniel didn't panic. The arrow seemed to change trajectory mid-air as it streaked back toward the snake once more. Its tail flickered with a sharp burst of sound and power, instantly shattering the arrow from behind. As the snake reached Daniel, it launched itself, its mouth opening with a wicked hiss as its fangs extended outward, threatening to sink into Daniel's neck. Daniel's body reacted instantly, moving in harmony with the balance and movement training taught in Alohan's course. With a hard expression on his face and his muscles tensed, Daniel twisted out of the way. His hand flashed backward as he grabbed an arrow from his quiver. Without hesitation, he lashed out. The arrow sank into the snake's eye. The sound of flesh tearing echoed, followed by a sharp hissing noise as the monster thrashed in pain and rage. But it was all useless. Daniel was already on one of the nearby trees, 3 arrows flying out in rapid succession. With precise aim, the arrows connected with the snake's head and its remaining eye, instantly killing it. Daniel wiped the imaginary sweat from his forehead before returning to his original position calmly. The man appeared once more, then vanished with the snake's carcass, leaving no trace behind. Asher watched quietly, waiting for his name to be called. He noticed that Drake seemed to have a way of identifying people's fighting capabilities without even knowing their life rank. But Asher wasn't surprised by this revelation. People possessing extreme battle senses existed in almost every novel and anime he had read or watched back on Earth. Or in Drake's case, it might be a unique ability. Still, Asher couldn't help but wonder how many abilities the man possessed. The instructor could also fly, after all. From what Asher had read, no known life rank allowed for flight in this world. Anyone defying gravity either had it as a unique ability or it was an advanced application of their existing powers or bloodline. Asher shook his head, deciding to stop thinking about what kind of ability the instructor might possess. He also seems to match trainees against monsters that can cover their weaknesses. Asher thought as he continued watching the unfolding events. Take Daniel, for example. He was an archer. Archers were usually considered vulnerable once enemies closed the distance, and Drake had precisely used a monster that could do just that against him. Snakes were slippery, fast, and reactive. They could easily dodge arrows, closing quickly, and also see through most hiding methods with their natural thermal vision. Ella. Echo. Drake announced suddenly. Ella smiled and responded, "I hope you're ready for a show." "Tenth son," she said sweetly as she walked forward with that same smile gracing her lips. "I hope you don't get tossed around." Asher couldn't help but reply, a smirk tugging at his lips. As one of the strongest within the first training ground, Ella was paired against an Echo-ranked monster. Echo-ranked beasts generally possessed abilities, but not all Echo-ranked monsters were on the same level. Some were simply faster, stronger, and had more dangerous or practical abilities than others. But the people of Crymora didn't see the need to classify these monsters any further. Just like how people could be on the same major life rank, but possess different minor ranks, the same principle applied to monsters and beasts. They might share classification, but vary greatly in actual strength. Ella stood calmly, her posture relaxed but confident as she waited for her opponent. Soon, her adversary arrived, a black and red bear standing over 2 meters tall, with blood-red eyes that looked as though they had long since sunk into madness. But Ella didn't even blink. Her expression shifted. That soft smile disappeared the moment she stepped forward. In the monster subjugation training, there were no restrictions. Everyone was allowed to battle using everything they had. There were no starting signals, no countdowns, and certainly no time to prepare, just like on any real battlefield. Ruruar. The wild bear roared with full force, its voice rumbling through the area like a shockwave, but Ella wasn't here to enjoy its concert. Without a word, she vanished from her location. In the blink of an eye, she appeared near the beast. Her fist shot out toward the bear's head like a launched cannon. The beast was caught off guard. Most humans allowed it to roar to its heart's content before battle truly began, but this female didn't follow those rules. Seeing the incoming fist, the bear reacted. Its fur extended outward, morphing into sharp spikes that threatened to tear through Ella's incoming punch like spears. Ella's eyes instantly squinted. She knew she couldn't stop her attack mid-motion. It would create an opening the beast could exploit. With nothing but a thought, the water element bloomed around her. A swirling circular platform formed just in time, stopping her fist from connecting directly and being shredded. The bear didn't waste any time. Its paw lashed out with explosive force, slicing through the air. The wind tore apart in its wake as the bear's claws came down toward Ella's entire body. But her expression didn't even shift. Her body moved fluidly, her fist shooting out again and meeting the paw head-on. A thunderous boom rang out as their attacks collided. The ground beneath their feet cracked and buckled under the pressure. Ella's sharp eyes noticed the bear's fur beginning to move again. She reacted instantly, her form blurring as she darted backward, narrowly avoiding another barrage of fur spikes. The bear entered a frenzy, unleashing a furious storm of spikes. Ella went on the defensive, weaving between each projectile with remarkable footwork. Behind her, anything the spikes touched was obliterated instantly. Trees were torn through like paper, and debris scattered in all directions. But Ella didn't panic. She knew the bear didn't have infinite fur to shoot. All she had to do was remain calm and keep dodging. She had the speed and the stamina to outlast the beast's wild assault. And just as she had predicted, the barrage ended within seconds. Still, she didn't rush in. She raised a hand slowly, her eyes locked on the beast. Water swirled midair and then surged forward, forming a swirling cocoon that enveloped the bear's head. It was deprived of oxygen almost instantly. The bear flailed. Its paws reached up, desperately trying to tear the water away from its face, its body shaking violently as it panicked. But Ella wasn't done. She wouldn't leave such an opening unpunished. Astra burst beneath her feet, launching her forward like a bolt of lightning. In a single breath, she stood before the bear again, her fist clenched tightly as she channeled Astra into it. Without hesitation, she struck, punching forward like a rocket launched with all its might. The air itself recoiled under the force of her punch. A loud bam echoed, followed by a sickening sound of flesh ripping apart. The bear's belly exploded outward like a ruptured drum. The force of the punch shot straight through the beast's body, blowing out its back and tearing open a massive hole as if it had been struck by a missile. Blood, entrails, and gore splashed across Ella's body, but she didn't react, not even a blink. The bear's lifeless body fell with a heavy thud, its blood pooling beneath it, dyeing the ground red. Ella turned calmly and walked back to her position without a word, as though nothing had happened. Asher looked at Ella, who used her water ability to wash away the blood on her body and clothes, leaving her completely soaked. If I didn't know you, I would have thought you had a grudge against that bear. Tearing open a huge hole like that is insane. Tom couldn't help but comment, still stunned by her brutal finish. Well, what can I say? I just need a stronger Echo-ranked beast. Ella spoke confidently, wringing out her sleeve as water dripped from her hair and chin. Why don't you go fight a Veil-ranked beast, then? Hito asked from the side, his tone flat but teasing. I will, when the instructor agrees, Ella replied with a smirk. Deep down, though, she knew she couldn't win against a Veil-ranked beast. The bear she had just fought was on the lowest end of the Echo rank spectrum. Your hand-to-hand combat never ceases to amaze me. Many women with the ability to control water would just focus entirely on that. Asher remarked from the side, genuinely impressed. I'm different from everyone else. Outside of those broken bloodline abilities, I'm sure I stand somewhere at the top, Ella boasted, her words laced with a charming smile and confidence that shimmered in her eyes. But Asher didn't reply. He simply smiled softly to himself. He knew better than to underestimate the world. There was always someone stronger, someone more talented, someone hidden away. Who knew what talents the Dukes were sheltering? Who knew what monsters the other empires had yet to reveal? Although Asher would love to declare himself the most talented of all, it was better to kill off any form of pride or arrogance before it rose too high. There could be people far better than him. Worse, there could be other transmigrators or reincarnated individuals with systems, cheats, or blessings from mysterious entities. I want to see what the 10th Son is capable of. Hito spoke, his eyes narrowed, lost in thought as he looked toward the arena. He'll probably go last. The best are always saved for last, Tom replied casually, resting his hands behind his head. Their conversation continued as more trainees stepped up to face monsters. Many were just one misstep away from death, and a number of them had to be saved by Drake before disaster struck. Serious injuries were handed out like snacks. The man who brought the beasts always healed them afterward with calm precision, returning them to their feet. Not everyone was like Ella, capable of blowing up their opponent with a single fist. Of course, Asher saw a few promising trainees in the mix, but for now, they were still too unrefined, too green. He couldn't wait to face the real prodigies, the overpowered children of dukes and royals. Not weaklings like Ryan. He wondered how strong individuals like Veilric and Veilra Lux Vanthelmore were. After all, they were the royal prince and princess of the Empire. Children like that would have been trained since the moment of their birth. Not just in battle, but in strategy, elemental theory, and ancient knowledge. Asher couldn't help but smile at the thought of facing them. I'm turning into a battle maniac every single day. This bloodline is really a problem, Asher thought. Whenever he found himself enjoying the thrill of battle, he would always blame the Wargrave bloodline. But deep down, he knew the truth: his love for fighting had nothing to do with genetics. Bloodlines awakened abilities. They didn't influence behavior or desire. Tom. Echo. Drake's voice echoed again, this time from above, as he floated lazily in the sky without so much as a flap or gesture. Tom didn't say a word. He simply stepped forward, a huge hammer resting across his shoulder. He looked ready to break down anything in his path with sheer, crushing force. In front of him stood a feline predator. Its body was sleek, covered in black fur that shimmered faintly under the light. Its tail swayed behind it like a whip, eyes narrowed as it locked onto Tom with a predator's gaze. Matching him against a speed-type monster since he's a strength type, Asher thought silently as he observed the pairing. The monster didn't wait. It pounced forward like a flash of death. Its claws were already just meters away from Tom's face, its movements silent and deadly. But Tom had predicted this. Felines always behaved like this, stealthy, fast, and aggressive. The moment his name was called, Tom had already channeled Astra into his feet. In a sudden burst of motion, his figure blurred. The monster's claws sliced through an afterimage that lingered where Tom had stood. He was already beside the feline beast, his hammer crashing down from the side with terrifying force. But the feline turned into a blur itself and vanished into a gust of wind. Its tail streaked through the air, aiming to slam into the back of Tom's skull. But Tom was ready. His hand snapped out. He caught the tail mid-swing, dragging it backward with raw power. With his hammer raised in the other hand, he swung with devastating intent. But the feline predator wasn't just fast, it was clever. Instead of defending or dodging, it attacked. Its claws shimmered under the light as it shot them straight for Tom's throat. It went for mutual destruction. Tom had no choice but to let go and dodge. It was his throat, after all. With a rapid body shift, he bent backward, his spine arching in an impossible angle, his back nearly parallel with the earth beneath him. The feline's claws swiped past where his throat should have been. If that attack had landed, he would have died instantly. No healer could fix a torn-open throat like that. As the feline landed on all fours, it instantly vanished. Tom frowned, narrowing his eyes as he realized he had lost visual contact with the beast. Invisibility. That's its ability, he realized instantly. But Tom wouldn't wait to be ambushed. He raised his hammer and activated his own ability. Tom's ability allowed him to increase the mass of anything he touched, yet to him, the weight remained the same. He raised the hammer with both hands to the sky. Its form remained unchanged, but its mass increased exponentially. What had once been manageable in weight now carried the density of a collapsing star, but to Tom, it still felt light. That was what made him terrifying. He could make a pencil weigh tons, and while it would feel feather-light in his hand, once it struck someone, the result would be catastrophic. Tom's hammer came down with explosive intensity. The entire forest quaked. A ravine formed underneath the sheer pressure. Gusts of wind tore through the trees, toppling them like twigs in a storm. Since he couldn't locate the invisible feline, he decided to simply destroy everything. And just as he had predicted, the feline reappeared. His destructive attack had disrupted its invisibility. Without hesitation, Tom hurled his hammer at the beast. The feline vanished again, streaking sideways in a burst of speed, but that was part of Tom's plan. He couldn't keep up with it in speed, so he would force it into predictable movements. As the feline dodged, Tom was already there, waiting. The weight of his fist had already shifted. His punch connected with the feline skull. With a thunderous blast, blood and bone exploded across the ground. The creature's head was forcefully exploded to bits, and the forest fell silent once more. The battlefield smelled of death, raw power, and iron. Tom cast a brief glance at the lifeless feline predator before strolling over to retrieve his hammer. With a faint smile tugging at his blood-streaked face, he turned to the group, his posture relaxed, confident. He needed no reminder. Tom was fully aware of the sheer danger his ability posed. Its versatility and overwhelming power left little room for doubt. In terms of raw, unadulterated strength, he had already accepted that he reigned supreme. As always, the man appeared without warning, silently collecting the carcass before vanishing just as swiftly as he had come. "I must admit, your abilities are quite devastating," Asher remarked, unable to hold back his thoughts. He could already envision the scale of destruction Tom could unleash, toppling an entire empire, should he ever decide to. "I'm well aware. No need to remind me," Tom replied with a smirk, his tone tinged with undeniable arrogance. Ella, standing off to the side, rolled her eyes. "Why the arrogance? Someone with superior speed could end you before you even get the chance to activate that flashy power." As she spoke, her water swirled gently around Tom, washing the blood from his body in smooth, controlled waves. The monster subjugation training pressed on, and soon it was Hito's turn. "Hito!" "Echo!" Drake's voice rang out once more from above, calm but lazy. Hito said nothing. He merely stepped forward, his expression unreadable. As expected, the enigmatic man appeared again, but this time he was not alone. 5 monsters accompanied him, but one stood out in particular. Towering over 2 meters tall while balanced on its powerful hind limbs, it resembled an insectoid predator. More precisely, it was a monstrous praying mantis, though any resemblance to its natural counterpart ended there. Its forelimbs had evolved into wicked, curved sides, perfect for slicing through flesh. Its mandibles were sharp, serrated, and clearly built for rending meat rather than chewing leaves. Translucent wings stretched menacingly from its back, and its long, thin antennae extended outward, subtly twitching as if tasting the air for blood. Without a moment's pause, the monstrous praying mantis, if they could even be called that, lunged forward with blinding speed, their movements defying the expectations set by their towering forms. But in that same instant, 4 identical figures materialized beside the real Hito, perfectly synchronized copies. Without hesitation, all 5 drew their twin short swords in unison, their silhouettes blurring as they launched themselves into the fray. Steel clashed with chitin in a violent, chaotic symphony. The sharp clang of blades striking hardened limbs reverberated across the forest, the sound sharp enough to rattle the eardrums of nearly everyone present. This was Hito's ability, clone creation. Each clone he summoned mirrored his own physical capabilities, possessing the same strength and speed as the original. However, they could not, in turn, replicate themselves. What made this power even more complex was its reflective nature. Any physical state Hito was in at the moment of creation, whether injured, fatigued, or whole, was exactly mirrored in his clones. If he were missing a limb, so were they. This unique limitation did little to diminish the overwhelming potential of his skill. It rendered Hito a one-man army, a warrior who could multiply himself on command, each duplicate as deadly as the source. Perhaps most remarkable of all was the nature of their energy. These clones were not tethered to Hito's Astra. Instead, each one manifested with its own reservoir of Astra, identical in volume to Hito's own Astra at the exact moment they were born. Hito could be seen exchanging rapid strikes with the monstrous praying mantis as they tore through the forest, their movements a blur, ghost-like as they darted between trees and underbrush. Their forms seemed to drift and shimmer, barely discernible to the eye. The creature's wings beat violently against the wind, propelling it with terrifying speed. There was no pause, no moment of hesitation, only relentless, forward-driving instinct. One of its scythe-like limbs swept through the air in a deadly arc, aiming straight for Hito's shoulder. But Hito shifted fluidly, his body gliding sideways in a flawless sidestep. In the same motion, his short sword flicked upward, cutting through the air like a whisper, its tip aimed with surgical precision toward the monster's eye, the attack veiled in a shimmering haze of speed and intent. But the praying mantis was no mere insect to be underestimated. It was a predator through and through. Its monstrous form held the speed, reflexes, and instincts of a seasoned killer. With a sudden gust of power, its wings beat hard against the wind, and its body twisted midair at an angle that defied logic, an impossible maneuver for a creature of its size and structure. In a flash, one of its slender antennae lashed forward like a whip, striking with deadly precision. It slashed across Hito's cheek before he could react, carving a thin, crimson line into his skin. The pain was sharp but brief. Both combatants disengaged, landing several meters apart. The forest fell still for a breath. They locked eyes, man and monster, each gauging the other. The praying mantis mandibles clicked and clenched with eerie rhythm, almost as if it were mocking him, taunting him with its strange, alien composure. Poison, Hito realized. He could already feel his senses beginning to dull, the numbness creeping in with each passing second. He knew it wouldn't be long before paralysis set in, before he became easy prey to the monstrous predator before him. But Hito didn't panic. Without a moment's hesitation, he launched himself forward, a blur of motion driven by utter calmness. The praying mantis responded in kind, its wings beating furiously as it surged to meet him. They closed the distance like titans on a collision course. Then, just as they were about to clash, Hito detonated. A deafening explosion erupted from his position, unleashing a shockwave that tore through the forest with unrestrained fury. The earth beneath them ruptured, a massive crater ripping itself open at the point of impact. Trees were uprooted like twigs, flung violently aside. Stones, boulders, and even the air itself screamed under the pressure of the blast, none of it offering the slightest resistance. As the smoke and haze began to lift, the aftermath of the explosion revealed itself in brutal clarity. Shattered remains of the praying mantis body were scattered across the battlefield, limbs twisted and torn, its exoskeleton shredded as though it had been sliced apart by invisible blades. The detonation had ripped through it like scissors through parchment. But Hito himself was nowhere to be seen. It hadn't been the original. That Hito had merely been a clone, one that, sensing its imminent demise from the creeping paralysis, chose a final act of calculated destruction. Rather than allow itself to fall, it transformed into a living bomb, sacrificing itself to obliterate the monster in a single, devastating burst. In Surmura, self-detonation was an impossibility for most. No being could simply explode themselves. But Hito's clones were the exception. They could ignite themselves with intent, amplifying the force of their destruction through the controlled release of their astra. And when they did, the result was nothing short of catastrophic. The remaining praying mantis reeled, caught off guard by the sudden, devastating explosion. But the Hitos did not falter. They had anticipated the detonation, and they wasted no time capitalizing on the chaos. Their short swords lashed out like lightning bolts, precise and merciless. One of the clones closed the distance in an instant, decapitating his target with a single fluid strike. But there was no pause, no celebration, only movement. Without missing a beat, he surged toward the next beast, blades gleaming with intent. The original Hito, ever calculating, immediately summoned back the detonated clone, restoring it in perfect condition. With renewed numbers, the Hitos swept across the battlefield with ruthless efficiency, cutting down the remaining monsters in a flurry of coordinated strikes. This was another facet of Hito's deadly brilliance. Any clone that sustained critical injury was converted into a suicide unit, using the last of its astra to detonate with overwhelming force. And once the explosion had served its purpose, the original body would simply summon the clone anew, unharmed, fully restored, and ready to fight again. The clones faded away, vanishing like mist, and Hito returned to his original position with calm, unhurried strides. Not a single drop of blood stained his skin, no wounds, no fatigue. He looked untouched, as if he had never stepped into battle at all. Asher watched him closely, a quiet fascination flickering in his eyes. He had always found clone-based abilities intriguing, versatile, dangerous, and filled with limitless potential. But Hito's version was something else entirely. Unlike others, his clones had no power restrictions, no diluted strength. They were perfect replicas, and that made him terrifying. With such an ability, Hito could infiltrate both sides of any war, send one clone into the shadows to serve darker forces, while another operated openly in the light. Resources, intelligence, secrets, they would pour in from both sides, converging into one mind. But beyond espionage, there was the raw destructive power. If Hito grew strong enough, his suicide bomber clones alone could reduce cities to ash, perhaps even bring an empire to its knees. "I think you should quit Wargrave and become a terrorist," Asher said casually, glancing at Hito with a half-serious smirk. Hito's lips twitched ever so slightly. This wasn't the first time he'd heard that suggestion. Others had jokingly, or not so jokingly, said the same thing in the past. "Think about it," Asher went on, grinning. "No need to join a gang when you are a gang. You could call your crew the Suicide Squad. It practically names itself." Ella jumped in, amused. "Seriously, how did I not think of this before? You could actually form a gang. And the best part? You don't even have to show up. Just send a clone while you relax at home." But Hito didn't reply. He stood quietly to the side, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had no interest in arguing with those two. Time slipped by, and the sun began its slow descent beyond the horizon. Evening crept in, casting long shadows across the forest floor and bathing the sky in hues of amber and violet. Yet no one moved. No one even considered leaving. After all, the 10th son had yet to take the field, and they were all waiting for him, Asher. Even Tom, Hito, and Ella, despite their own remarkable showings, were drawn in by the mystery surrounding him. Each Wargrave descendant was said to awaken an element tied to their bloodline, and while they had all displayed their abilities before, Asher's had remained a secret. Not once had he revealed it, not even in passing conversation, and oddly, none of them had ever thought to ask. High above, nestled within the crown of a towering tree, 3 figures watched in silence. Vyrek, Eloin, and Harold, hidden from the crowd, stood like silent sentinels, their gazes fixed on the clearing below. "How do you think the 10th son will fare in his first battle?" Eloin asked, a faint smile playing on her lips as she kept her eyes fixed on the clearing below. Harold folded his arms, his tone thoughtful. The 10th son is undeniably gifted, so much so that it borders on something unnatural. But this is different. This is a real battle, not theory, not sparring. I expect he'll perform spectacularly, as always, but there may be a slight hiccup. Even brilliance can stutter in the face of unpredictability. Vyrek, whose gaze hadn't once shifted from the pages of the erotic novel he held in hand, chimed in without lifting his eyes. "I agree. Even though he's absorbed some of our experiences, it's still not the same. Watching and knowing is one thing. Living it is another." True to his usual disinterest, Vyrek hadn't spared a glance at any of the trainees during their fights. Not even for Hito, Ella, or Tom, the most noteworthy of the group. But what none of them knew, what no one watching from the trees or standing around the field could have guessed, was that this wouldn't be Asher's first battle. For most, the monster subjugation exercise marked their first encounter with a real beast. It was a controlled first taste of danger, blood, and survival. But not for Asher. He had faced monsters before. Fought, killed, bled. No one knew simply because Asher had never said a word. He wasn't the type to boast, especially not about slaying a handful of whisper and echo-ranked beasts. There was no glory in it, no need for attention. And the rumors? There were none. The Wargrave Knights were trained to keep their mouths shut. Discipline ran in their blood, silence ingrained into their bones. If any of them had seen what Asher had done, they took it to their graves, or at least kept it buried deep within their oaths. So while others watched with curiosity, expecting a prodigy's first taste of battle, Asher was merely returning to something he already knew. Then, Drake's voice lazily echoed from above. "Asher, Vale." The word struck like a lightning bolt across the training grounds. For a moment, silence reigned. Eyes widened, breaths hitched. Even the most confident trainees felt their hearts falter. Veil. The thought rippled through the crowd like a wave of disbelief. The difference between Echo and Veil wasn't a simple step, it was a chasm. Like the gap between night and day, between stone and steel. Every rank leap in monster classification was massive, each one marking a fundamental shift in power, ferocity, and danger. Most had expected Asher to be tested against an Echo-ranked monster at its peak, challenging, sure, but survivable. But this? A Veil-ranked beast? Was he really that strong? They couldn't help but have such thoughts. Asher didn't speak. He stepped forward in silence, his movements unhurried, yet precise, each stride calm, deliberate, and filled with an almost unnatural stillness. In a subtle flash, Virilis materialized in his hand, its silver blade humming faintly. His eyes sharpened, senses elevating to their peak. He was ready. Then, the man appeared once again. But this time, he brought with him two monsters. Orcs. Their skin was a deep, mossy green, stretched tightly over towering frames that stood nearly 8 feet tall. Veins bulged across their arms and chests, their muscle mass exaggerated to grotesque proportions. Each one gripped a massive, metallic club lined with vicious, rusted spikes, more of a slab of death than a weapon. As the man vanished into thin air, so did hesitation. The orcs moved. Their speed was absurd, completely betraying their size. In the blink of an eye, they were already beside Asher, one to his left, the other to his right, their clubs raised high, descending like executioner's blades toward his skull. There was no time to think, only to act. But Asher was already in motion. The instant the orcs struck, his body darted backward with fluid motion. A thunderous boom followed as the spiked club slammed into the ground, the earth trembling violently before caving in beneath the impact. Yet Asher didn't just evade, he countered. Virilis flashed forward in a sharp arc, aimed directly at the first orc's Achilles tendon, a calculated strike meant to cripple. But the orc reacted with surprising speed, lifting its leg mid-swing and launching a brutal kick toward Asher's head. The massive foot entered Asher's omniperception, his mind registering every muscle shift, every subtle twitch. With a seamless twist of his body, his center of gravity shifted, and Virilis moved in harmony, its flat side rising just in time to absorb the incoming blow. A colossal force crashed against him. Asher's arms steadied against the impact, and though the rapier had lessened the force, the sheer power of the orc's kick sent him skidding backward. His boots carved deep trenches into the ground, earth and dust flaring behind him as he regained control. Before Asher could so much as catch his breath, the second orc was already upon him, its massive spiked club arcing toward his temple with terrifying speed, ready to turn his skull into pulp. Asher reacted instantly. Virilis cleaved through the air like a streak of silver, meeting the incoming blow head-on. The collision was thunderous. Steel met steel in a deafening metallic scream, the clash sending out a blinding shower of sparks. The sheer force of impact detonated the air around them, triggering a shockwave so violent it uprooted trees and blasted the earth backward in a sweeping, chaotic arc. In the haze of smoke and dust, their figures blurred into silhouettes, locked in a brutal dance of speed and power. Again and again, they collided with earth-shaking force, their movements too fast for trained eyes of the trainees to follow. Tremors rippled through the ground with every step, every strike, every impact. The orcs moved with deadly intensity, their enormous frames doing nothing to hinder their blinding momentum. They weren't just brutes, they were monsters in perfect form. Raw power, blistering speed, and an instinct for violence that made them terrifying foes. They had it all, but so did Asher. Attacks rained down on Asher from every direction, left, right, above, below. The air screamed with each strike, deafening in its fury. Every movement carried crushing weight, each swing capable of shattering bone and earth alike. Yet Asher moved like water flowing through chaos. His rapier and hand had become a phantom, flickering with impossible speed, deflecting, parrying, blocking in rapid succession. Each motion was precise, economical, and instinctive, as though his body operated on a rhythm no one else could hear. Despite the overwhelming barrage, his eyes remained calm, focused. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, his breathing controlled, unshaken by the violence around him. He searched for openings in the endless assault, and when he found even the smallest gap, he struck. Virilis would dart out like a serpent's fang, sharp, swift, lethal. But every time, the orcs met him. Their defenses snapped into place with uncanny timing, as if they could see his attacks before he even moved. Their reactions weren't just fast, they were instinctual, predictive. The soil tore beneath their feet as they pushed forward, two forces colliding at speeds that blurred the eye. Dust and grit spiraled in their wake, but Asher's focus never wavered. His gaze locked with one of the orcs, and in that split second, a smile curved at the corner of his lips. Then, everything changed. His rhythm shifted, fluid turned sharp, defense became offense. Without warning, Asher surged forward, Virilis flashing toward the orc's neck with blistering speed and ruthless efficiency. The orc faltered, caught off guard, but instincts honed by years of bloodshed, caging, and survival surged to life. It stepped back in a blur, moving to evade the fatal stroke. Almost, just as Virilis was about to whistle harmlessly past where the neck had been, Asher twisted his wrist. The blade curved midair, a seamless, unnatural adjustment, as if it flowed like a living thing. Virilis descended and tore, with a sound like ripping canvas. The blade bit through the orc's chest in a clean, savage arc, carving downward in a perfect line. A spray of thick, green blood exploded into the air, painting the grass beneath them a darker shade of battle. Before Asher could follow up, the second orc was already upon him. The spike club tore through the air, entering his omni-perception like a crashing wave. He saw it, read it, but it was too close, too fast. There was no time to dodge, no space to shift. Too late. Then it came. Lightning. A burst of pure brilliance, violet and violent, erupted around him. A crackle split the air, sharp and deafening, like the roar of the heavens tearing open. And Asher vanished. In his place, only a bolt of purple lightning streaked across the battlefield, searing a jagged path through the air. The ground where he had stood erupted from the shock of raw, elemental energy, scorched and cracked in a perfect line behind him. The orc's club slammed into nothing but air, the force of its mist strike toppling a tree in the distance. Asher reappeared behind the first orc, its chest wound already beginning to mend, the creature's natural regeneration swiftly taking hold. In a blur of motion, Asher's rapier sprang to life, its blade flickering toward the orc's neck with blinding lethality. Before the beast could so much as flinch, Virilis carved cleanly through its throat, like a heated blade slicing through softened wax. A geyser of green blood burst upward, splattering across Asher's hair in a vivid spray. The severed head tumbled to the earth, rolling like a discarded stone, moments before the orc's massive frame collapsed with a resounding thud. The second orc bellowed in a frenzy as it witnessed its companion's brutal demise. Ruarar! A deafening sound wave surged from its throat, tearing through the air toward Asher's position, threatening to obliterate him into nothing but mangled flesh. But Asher responded in an instant. Virilis rose skyward, its blade catching the light. Then, like a conductor of wrathful divinity, it drew upon the storm. Veins of purple lightning crackled along its length, thunder snarling in its wake. With a motion both forceful and elegant, Asher brought the rapier down in a sweeping arc, a devastating crescent of pure, baleful lightning carved through the air, howling with ruinous power. With a storm's thunderous roar, the lightning collided with the onrushing sound wave, erupting in every direction with the fury and madness of unrestrained destruction. Trees were torn asunder in an instant, their leaves scorched to ash. Stones blackened and split where the lightning kissed them. The lingering resonance of the sonic blast struck with brutal force, rattling the bones of all nearby and threatening to rupture their eardrums. Smoke veiled the battlefield in a choking shroud, swallowing the chaos in a suffocating gloom. Then, without warning, a violent gust burst outward, dispersing the smoke in a single breath as the orc swung its massive club with raw power, parting the haze like a god of war unveiling its wrath. With another guttural roar, the orc surged forward, its speed and strength magnified to terrifying extremes. It had entered its berserker state. In the blink of an eye, it closed the distance between them, and its colossal club came crashing down from above with the weight and judgment of an angry god. But it was futile. In its frenzy, the orc had traded clarity for raw power. Speed and strength surged through its veins, but its judgment was lost to madness. And in that madness, Asher found his advantage. He slipped through the orc's wild, uncoordinated strikes as effortlessly as a dragon's breath swallows a fireball. Lightning crackled along Virilis and danced across Asher's form, wrapping him in a storm of purple arcs. With a swift sidestep, he evaded the club's downward crash, and in that same motion, Virilis carved through the orc's kneecap. The creature collapsed to one knee with a howl of feral rage, its club swinging blindly in retaliation. But Asher had already vanished, leaving behind a crackling bolt of lightning. He reappeared beside the beast, his rapier a blur as it thrust cleanly through the orc's shoulder. Another flicker, another flash, Asher was behind it. One final stroke. Virilis cleaved through the orc's neck with deadly ease, severing its head in a seamless arc. The berserker's fury died with it. Whatever power had driven its rampage faded instantly. The massive body collapsed in a lifeless heap, and Asher, without sparing it a second glance, turned and walked away, the storm humming quietly around him. Everyone stood frozen, their expressions painted with disbelief, as if reality itself had just been twisted before their eyes. Asher had dismantled two Veil-ranked monsters as though they were nothing more than bothersome flies. They had witnessed the ease with which he moved, graceful, measured, and untouchable. He wasn't panting. He didn't break a sweat. Not a scratch marked his body. He was serene. Was that really his first battle? The question echoed quietly in their minds, unspoken but mutual. Every time they thought they had grasped the extent of who he was, Asher revealed something even more unimaginable. And now, he had unveiled his element, lightning. But not just any lightning. Purple lightning, vibrant and violent. The same shade that shimmered in his hair and eyes. A perfect, terrifying harmony. Green blood splattered across his frame, and somehow, it only made him look more divine, like a god of war stepping down from the heavens. They had seen it. He had split a sound wave. A full force, deafening shockwave hurled by a berserk orc, and he had cut through it like it was air. Isn't this too much? Ella couldn't help but wonder, her thoughts ringing with disbelief. She knew the truth. A single strike from a Veil-ranked orc was more than enough to cripple her. Orcs were monsters of raw muscle and brute strength. But these weren't just orcs. They were Veil-ranked, a different breed entirely. They had expected a fight. They had hoped for it. But what they saw, they couldn't comprehend. Asher felt their stares, but said nothing. Alongside Tom, Hito, and Ella, he stepped calmly out of the first training ground. "Can you stop looking at me like that? I'm not some peacock flaunting its feathers." He finally muttered, a hint of exasperation in his voice. "It can't be helped," Ella replied, her tone half serious. "I'm just wondering, are all suns and moons like you? If they are." Her voice trailed off, unfinished. Asher shook his head, offering nothing more. "See you tomorrow. Good night." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing toward his room. 5 months had passed since Asher's first time in a monster subjugation training ground. Since that initial experience, he had made a truly miraculous amount of progress, something that left many speechless when they heard of his current level. He had successfully broken through into the next life rank, the Radiant Kindlestar rank. Although the rate at which he could cultivate and strengthen his astroveins had decreased slightly compared to before, it didn't bother Asher in the slightest. He was already progressing at a rate that was considered inhuman, especially in a place where others hardly made any noticeable advancement even after months or years. At this moment, Asher was leaving the first training ground after completing the day's training. He still fought Vale-ranked monsters and beasts, but they were far more powerful and aggressive than the first orcs he had fought. However, this difference mattered not to his blade. He still cut everything down without hesitation, like it was nothing more than dried grass in the path of a sharp scythe. As he walked alongside his friends, Tom spoke from the side with a curious tone. "10th son, do you know what the true awakening is about?" It was common knowledge within the entire empire, if not the entire known world, that the Wargrave household always held its own unique awakening ritual, which they called the True Awakening. So, Asher wasn't particularly surprised that Tom, or even the rest of his friends, knew something about it. But the truth was, it wasn't anything like the typical awakening that occurred when the astroveins were activated during the main and original ceremony. This was different. Asher simply shook his head and responded, "I don't, but I think I'll be briefed about it before it begins." And indeed, he didn't know the exact details of the True Awakening, but based on what he had gathered from both Lyra's vague words and his own analysis, Asher had come to a tentative conclusion. It most likely involved a life-or-death battle, one that no one could interrupt. Your True Awakening is going to be held next week already. Shouldn't you be doing everything you can to find out more about it? After all, even the smallest bit of information could prove useful. Ella asked, her voice tinged with a hint of concern. Although she knew Asher, the 10th son, was a complete monster in combat, something with the name True Awakening, and being a ritual of the Wargrave household shouldn't be taken lightly or underestimated. "Why are you suddenly getting all worried? Don't tell me you've fallen in love with me," Asher said with a slight smile, teasing her playfully. "I was never worried about you," Ella scoffed. "Besides, if anyone's falling for anyone, it's you. Just become a pre-March already and stop trying to trick me into making a confession that isn't even real." Asher chuckled lightly as they continued walking. His gaze slowly rose to the sky, which was dyed a beautiful orange hue as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the world in soft twilight. He wouldn't lie to himself and say he wasn't nervous. He was deep down. Asher felt a twinge of dread. The True Awakening was something he could potentially die in, and no one would step in to save him. He had once visited the library in an attempt to uncover any hidden information about the True Awakening, but he found nothing. No records, no books, not even rumors worth believing. So, in his frustration, he asked the Great Elder, the librarian, who had simply told him that 3 Wargraves had already died during their True Awakenings, and the household hadn't lifted a finger to save them, and that was during his own time, not to talk of the ones he was unaware of. The True Awakening was a place where he would be forced to fight to survive without any intervention, even if he were on the verge of death. During his first battle against the wolves on his journey to the royal party, Lyra and the Wargrave Knights had been there, ready to intervene if necessary. Even during his monster subjugation training, Drake had been around, watching closely to ensure that there would be no fatal or crippling injuries. But next week, that safety net would be gone. The orange glow of the sky above seemed to mirror his unease, reflecting off his body as if it sympathized with him. It was almost like the sky was mourning the possible fall of a genius, a monster. "I could always send a clone to secretly help you, though," Hito said casually, wearing a calm smile. "You do know you'd be executed on the spot if the suns and moons heard what you just said, right?" Ella commented from the side, her voice slightly sharp. Hito simply shrugged. "Then I'll just send another clone." Ella shook her head in exasperation and gave up arguing. Hito's clones were exact copies of him. Even if someone used an ability to inspect them, it would still show that each one was the real body. The only way to differentiate a clone from the real Hito was by forcefully asking the version in front of you to create another clone, and even then, some weren't certain. Besides, No one truly knew if this particular restriction would continue as Hito grew stronger. No one knew whether his clone's inability to make more clones was due to his ability limitations or simply because he had yet to gain better control over his ability. Later, guys, Asher said as he turned and walked away. After walking a short distance, he vanished from sight, instantly reappearing in his room. Lyra, bring dinner immediately. I don't have time to waste, Asher ordered. Lyra, who had already been standing quietly by his door, moved instantly to obey. Asher wanted to make use of every second he had left. He had only 1 week remaining. After taking a quick bath, he sat down at the table as Lyra brought in the food and carefully arranged it before him. Has anything changed within the Wargrave estate, Lyra? Asher asked, his tone calm and composed. Things rarely changed within the estate. The suns and moons were almost always away, and even the great elders and regular elders frequently ventured out, often returning with blood staining their robes and weapons. Hardly anything eventful ever occurred within the household itself. There was no family drama, no infighting, no squabbles, just endless battle and death. Every wargrave was always out there, busy sending enemies to their graves. Yes, young master, Lyra replied as she stood behind him in her usual respectful posture. Tell me, Asher said gently as he lifted his fork to take a bite. The first son, Malric Wargrave, returned a few hours ago. The Primarch also returned this morning after you left for the first training ground, Lyra said softly. Asher remained silent. Father and the first son, he thought to himself. They had both been present during his first awakening 6 months ago, and now they had returned again. Although Asher hadn't physically seen the Primarch during that ceremony, he had no doubt that the man had been watching him from afar. Anything else? Asher asked. Nothing else has changed, young master. But from what I know about the other true awakenings that have taken place during my time here, all the suns and moons are expected to return to the estate, Lyra said, her voice steady. Asher froze. Her words echoed like a thunderclap in his ears. Out of all the suns and moons, he had only met 2 suns and not a single moon. Even the elders and great elders, he had only ever spoken with the great elder, who was the librarian. Now, he was expected to meet them all, at once. A few days passed as the day of the true awakening drew closer and closer. One by one, the suns and moons began to return, their presences slowly gathering like looming clouds before a storm. The last time they had assembled at this level was during Asher's first awakening, the very same one in which he had failed. Now, however, the tension that filled the entire Wargrave estate was palpable. It hung in the air like a dense fog. Every maid, butler, and knight walked on eggshells, practically quaking in their boots. After all, meeting all the Wargraves at once was something so rare, so overwhelming, that even veterans of the estate felt unsettled. The Wargraves themselves wore cold, distant, or expressionless looks, faces carved from ice, which only served to deepen the terror in the hearts of those around them. At this moment, within a silent, dimly lit chamber, Azarin could be seen sitting in deep thought. His head rested gently against his palm, his golden eyes staring blankly up at the ceiling above him. His expression was unreadable, but a certain weight hung around his shoulders, as though invisible chains had bound him in place. At the side of the room stood Zarek, Azarin's personal butler and longtime right-hand man. He stood with poise and calm, silently observing the man who had long since earned the title of the strongest Wargrave, a man who could topple mountains and tear apart legions with nothing but his spear. And yet here he was, sighing continuously, mulling over something as though it was far beyond his reach, beyond his power. Azarin's thoughts, in this moment, were completely focused on Asher, his 10th heir, his 10th child, his 10th son. His wife, Lily of the Abyss, had entrusted Asher to him as her final, dying wish. She had placed the boy in his hands and asked only one thing: protect him. And now, here he was, throwing that very son into the fires of the true awakening, where death loomed like a specter waiting to strike. Azarin didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. He felt trapped at an impasse between duty and love. He knew Asher could die during the awakening process. In fact, Asher wouldn't be the first Wargrave to do so. But at the same time, Asher was a prodigy, a genius who even eclipsed his mother in talent when it came to the rapier. A rare brilliance that hadn't been seen in any generation. Azarin's heart was torn. If Asher was about to die, should he intervene? Should he save his son and honor the final wish of the woman he had loved with all his heart? Or should he sit back, bound to his seat by the heavy weight of tradition and legacy, the burden that came with the position of Primarch? He was bound by invisible, invincible chains. Which path should he choose? He sighed once more, the sound deeper this time. His heartbeat thudded louder in his chest, beating faster, harder, nervousness he hadn't felt in decades. He, the mighty Azarin, had long since forgotten the last time he had heard his own heart beat with such intensity. Perhaps only when fighting to death against a sin. What should I do? Azarin thought, his brows furrowing. Even if he did save Asher, nothing would happen to him. He was the strongest Wargrave for a reason. No one dared question his strength. No one could truly stand against him. But just because he could, didn't mean he should. Being Primarch wasn't a title to be thrown around. It came with rules, expectations, and ancient laws. Even he, at the top of the Wargrave hierarchy, couldn't casually break family tradition. His mind began spinning, thoughts churning like a storm. Contingency plans, escape strategies. If Asher ever fell into true danger, Azarin was already beginning to calculate how best to act without dismantling everything. From the side of the room, Zarek finally broke the silence. "Should I intervene when necessary?" he asked, his voice composed, yet thoughtful. Azarin heard the question, but didn't reply immediately. He continued to stare at the ceiling, unmoving. Zarek, patient as always, said nothing more. He simply waited for the reply. Azarin finally opened his mouth. "What do you think I should do, Zarek?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with tension. "Should I save my son's life? Or allow the weight of this crown to keep pressing me down?" He could confide in Zarek. Of that, he was certain. Zarek had been by his side since the beginning. He knew exactly how heavy the crown of the Primarch was. He had witnessed Azarin's rise. He knew the cost of it. Crown the strongest, yet forever bound by rules. "Azarin," Zarek said gently as he began to speak again, "I believe the answer to that question is, in some way, simple." Although he used the word simple, he understood more than anyone how far from simple it really was. Azarin's golden gaze finally moved, turning towards Zarek as he continued speaking. "You simply have to decide what you love more. The crown on your head, or your wife's dying wish." Zarek's words hit like thunder, reverberating through Azarin's chest. He frowned. Deep down, he knew Zarek was right. There was no middle path here. He had to choose one or the other. There was no balancing act this time. But if he were to truly choose, honestly, without fear of consequences, he would choose her. He would honor her. He had become the Primarch for her sake in the first place. He had fought, bled, and conquered just to be able to hold her hand. Besides, even if he did step down from the Primarch position for breaking tradition, his first son, Malric, was already powerful enough to take the mantle. The boy was ready. Azarin could gently retire, step away from it all, and spend the rest of his years fighting to his heart's content without the weight of the throne. The path was becoming clearer now. If Asher truly fell into grave danger, Azarin would save him. He would step down. Then Malric would take over. And if Asher didn't fall into danger, then all was well. Better to be prepared and not needed than unprepared when the worst happens. "But I don't think that's the only option, Azarin," Zarek said again, shattering the silence that had once more begun to settle in the room. Azarin blinked. "What do you mean, Zarek?" With a faint smile on his face, Zarek replied, "Do you really believe that Malric would just sit by and let Asher die during this true awakening?" Azarin froze. He hadn't considered that. Indeed, Malric wouldn't let Asher die. His first son wouldn't allow it. Azarin knew it in his bones. Malric would intervene. And if Malric did interfere, then as Primarch, the power to mete out punishment rested solely on Azarin's shoulders. He could simply assign a light punishment, or even none at all. How didn't I think of this earlier? Azarin thought, a slow smile spreading across his face as clarity dawned. His heart rate, which had been racing moments ago, began to slow. He was calm again. "Thank you," Azarin said sincerely, glancing towards Zarek. Zarek merely nodded, offering no further words. He had no children of his own, but that didn't mean he didn't understand Azarin's pain. "You better not die, Asher," Azarin thought, leaning back slightly. "Though I must admit, I'm starting to look forward to seeing what you'll do." Thousands of kilometers away from the Wargrave estate, another massive castle could be seen stretching out across vast meters of land. Its walls stood tall and majestic, towering with defiance as the castle itself seemed to pierce the sky like a challenge to the heavens. This was the Silver Shade ducal household estate. Roughly 6 months ago, the Silver Shades had suffered immense losses, both financially and reputationally, after they were forced to open their secret family vault and spend their hard-earned coins to pay the Duke of Wargrave. It had all happened because Duke Rydian Silvershade had lost a bet, one that he himself had suggested, confident in his success. Following that costly mistake, the entire household's daily affairs changed. Most noticeably, their meals. The quality and rarity of the food served in the estate dropped by nearly half, causing whispers among the servants and discontent among the family members. They had been forced to adjust their lifestyle to match their new, tighter budget. But not everyone was happy. In fact, most weren't. Their luxurious existence had been slashed in half as though struck by an invisible spear. Within a private chamber layered in extreme opulence, Duke Rydian sat calmly at a grand desk, signing a series of documents in hand. His pen glided smoothly across the pages as he worked in silence. Despite the events that had unfolded 6 months prior, his presence remained unshaken, composed, and authoritative. Though the Silvershade family's reputation had been dragged through the mud, and they had lost a significant portion of their wealth, Rydian had chosen to stay secluded in his castle rather than face society. He held no hatred toward the Wargraves. He had made the bet. He had taken a risk. He had simply wanted to make quick coin and make the Wargraves suffer a public loss. Instead, he had been the one humiliated. But it didn't bother him. Not truly. In the end, it was just money, and Rydian had plenty of that. As for Ryan, the one who had lost the bet for the family, Rydian had thrown him into even harsher training. He made it clear that Ryan wouldn't be leaving the training grounds until he met a certain standard, one that Rydian himself had set. Suddenly, the quiet of the chamber was broken by a sharp knock on the door. "Come in," Rydian's voice echoed, calm and commanding. The door creaked open, and a butler entered with graceful steps and composed eyes. However, before he could even offer a greeting, Rydian cut him off with a calm, even tone. "What is it?" he asked, his eyes still glued to the documents before him as his hand continued to move without pause. "The 10th Son's true awakening is set to begin in a few days," the butler replied respectfully. At those words, Rydian's pen finally paused. His gaze slowly lifted from the parchment, settling on the butler with a quiet intensity, as though he were finally granting the man his full attention. "And what am I supposed to do with that information?" Rydian asked, his voice low. "I hope you're not here to suggest I intervene." "I wouldn't dare suggest anything to the Duke," the butler replied immediately, bowing low with deep respect. "Then why are you here?" Rydian asked once again, his patience thinning. He detested unnecessary interruptions, especially while working. The butler straightened and finally delivered the reason for his presence. "The young master, Ryan, is already moving to intervene." Rydian's calm expression shifted into a sharp frown. "How stupid can that idiot possibly be?" he muttered, voice dropping into something dangerous. "Does he think the Wargrave's reputation is exaggerated? That their name is just empty noise?" He didn't need further details. He already knew what Ryan was trying to do, likely sending assassins to strike during the true awakening, attempting to sneak a wolf into a pen of chickens. "Tell him I said to do nothing foolish, or I'll personally cut off his arm," Rydian stated coldly. "And head to whatever guild he placed the order through, Cancel it immediately. Remove all traces. As you command, Patriarch, the butler replied, bowing once more before quickly exiting the room. As the door closed behind him, Rydian let out a long, slow sigh. Ryan wasn't the first to attempt something so foolish. It was practically tradition. During the Wargrave's infamous True Awakenings, other noble families, and even the royal family at times, would attempt to interfere. Assassins would be sent, sabotage arranged, all in a desperate effort to eliminate a potential threat before it could fully bloom. But the Wargraves weren't fools. They were always prepared. Every assassin who dared to cross their lines was hunted down, their information extracted through blood and agony. A massacre would follow. No matter the size of the assassin guild, they would be wiped out that same day. And if the order had come from a noble house, that family would join them in the grave. The Wargraves were merciless, terrifyingly so. They had never once married into other noble families, forging no political bonds. This made them immune to manipulation, unbound by subtle favors or alliances and manipulations. And when all was said and done, they left no evidence, no proof, no trace, no punishment. Rydian knew that if Azarin Wargrave so much as caught a scent of Silver Shade involvement, he and his estate would be leveled within minutes. They were simply too united, too disciplined, too monstrous to cross. I wonder if the boy will survive, Rydian thought, his black eyes narrowing with interest. Then, without another word, his pen began moving once more. Thousands of kilometers away from the Silver Shade estate, deep within the royal palace, another man had also received word of Asher's impending true awakening. Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanthelmore. Normally, no one outside of the Wargrave family paid much attention to these ceremonies. They were internal, private, uninteresting to outsiders. But this time they all watched. Whispers had already begun to spread. Would he survive? Or would he finally fall? Asher could be seen lying on his bed, the morning sun casting a warm golden ray through the window. His eyelids flickered as he finally stirred from his sleep. Glancing at the time, he noticed it was already past 12 p.m. in the afternoon. Asher sat up on the bed, stretching with a satisfied sigh, enjoying every second of it. I wonder when last I slept this long, Asher thought to himself as he jumped down from the bed. The true awakening was set to take place tomorrow, and Asher had been granted the privilege of skipping today's training at the first training ground to rest and prepare, although he still didn't fully understand what exactly he was preparing for. But regardless, he had been officially excused for the day. So, Asher simply slept until his body woke up naturally. Today, he wasn't going to do any rigorous training. Even his personal training was put on hold. Everything could wait until after the true awakening. Wasting no time, Asher headed into the bathroom for a quick bath, then changed into fresh clothes. As if she had been waiting for just this moment, Lyra entered his room with a card in hand. She quietly placed the food on the table before him. Seeing the variety and quantity of dishes in front of him, Asher raised an eyebrow. "What's the occasion?" he asked curiously. Lyra smiled gently as she responded, "Young master, your true awakening is tomorrow. I'm simply helping fill your stomach so you can gain all the energy you need." Asher glanced at her, then narrowed his eyes playfully. "Are you sure you're not just afraid I'll die tomorrow and you're trying to overfeed me with one last meal?" Lyra chuckled softly and shook her head. "I'm sure that, as the most talented wargrave to ever exist, you'll come back alive, young master." Her tone held absolute confidence, as if the thought of failure never crossed her mind. Asher didn't know where she got that confidence from. He, the one actually participating in the true awakening, was more than a little nervous. The probability of death was real, and yet Lyra seemed completely unfazed. "We both weren't here since the inception of the Wargrave bloodline. You can't be sure I'm the most talented wargrave ever birthed," Asher said, turning his attention to the mouth-watering array of dishes. Lyra said nothing in return. She simply gave a small bow and walked out of the room, taking her place just outside his door. "Why does this feel no different than the Last Supper from my previous world?" Asher thought, his lips twitching slightly in amusement. Then he dug in. Before long, he was done. Lyra came in and cleared the dishes swiftly. Asher rose to his feet, intending to use the day to explore the Wargrave estate and possibly meet some moons. After all, he had never met any of his sisters. But just as he opened the door, he found Zarek already standing outside, hand raised mid-knock. Even with my omni-perception, I still can't sense this man. How strong can a butler possibly be? Asher thought as he looked at Zarek. If his eyes weren't directly on the man, he would have bypassed his omni-perception entirely, as if he didn't exist. But considering he's the Primarch's right-hand man, I suppose this level of skill is necessary, Asher reasoned. 10th son, is there something on my face? Zarek asked casually as Asher stared at him. What can I help you with, Zarek? Asher asked, ignoring the question. The Primarch demands your presence, Zarek replied before turning on his heel and walking forward. Asher followed without question, and soon enough, he found himself standing in front of the Primarch. I greet the Primarch, Asher said as he bowed respectfully. Life must be really easy for you. To sleep until this time, Azarin remarked, shifting his sharp golden gaze to Asher. Asher remained silent for a brief second, thinking to himself, is he seriously complaining that I woke up late? No, Primarch, Asher replied evenly. I simply trained into the night since I wouldn't be training today. I wanted to ensure I'd be in optimal condition for the true awakening. His voice was calm, his hands clasped behind his back. He stood straight, posture perfect, like a well-trained soldier. About the awakening, do you know what it entails? Azarin asked, still observing him closely. Asher's purple eyes met the Primarch's golden ones without blinking or faltering. Is he finally going to brief me about the true awakening? He thought, a spark of hope lighting up within him. No, Patriarch, Asher answered respectfully. Then you'll find out during the true awakening, Azarin stated simply. The brief flicker of joy Asher had felt was instantly extinguished, though his expression remained neutral. He said nothing, merely waiting silently for Azarin to continue. I have a mission for you, Azarin added calmly. My first mission? Asher thought with growing interest. He had heard whispers about the infamous Wargrave missions, but never really paid them much attention. They had always felt distant, like a far-off milestone. Still, he knew one thing. Every mission came with a reward. Your mission, Azarin said, eyes never leaving his, is to come back alive. This is your first mission as a Wargrave. Before Asher could even form a response, Azarin continued with finality. You are dismissed. Asher bowed once again and stepped out of the room. As expected, Lyra was already waiting. Without a word, he walked off in a random direction, deep in thought. He couldn't understand the Primarch. His first official family mission was to survive? That felt redundant. He was already planning on surviving, mission or not. Though he was nervous, Asher had almost no doubt that he would return alive. After all, he had marked his room as a teleportation location over 5 months ago. If he ever found himself in genuine danger during the true awakening, he could simply run away, regardless of how far he was from the Wargrave estate. It was a trump card no one aside Lyra knew he had. As Asher stepped out of the room, Azarin sighed. The mission was just an excuse to give his son a reward, a way to compensate for his own inability to save him because of the constraints of his position. As Azarin remained deep in thought, the door opened, and a man standing at over 8 feet in height stepped in with a calm smile. The first son, Malric Wargrave. Azarin had already sensed his presence long before he arrived. Has the prodigal son finally remembered his father? Azarin spoke, his tone dry, as Malric simply sat down with composure. Father, I'm almost 30 already. I don't have to come see you every time I return home, Malric replied, still wearing that same carefree smile. Azarin snorted. Oomph. And which parent wouldn't want to see their children's faces when they come back from work? Your siblings came to greet me, but you, his eyes narrowed. You acted like I didn't exist, even though we returned on the same day, and before everyone else at that. Indeed, although both Malric and Azarin had come back on the same day, Malric hadn't visited him even once, and they had been back for 7 days now. Why didn't you come greet me then? Don't I deserve at least that much? Malric countered with a snort of his own, raising an eyebrow. When you become the Primarch, then I will. Azarin responded with a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Father, you have zero scheming ability. If you want me to become the Primarch so soon, you should try thinking harder, Malric replied, amused. Who? Just because you started scheming your way into noble politics, you now think you can talk back to me? Huh? Azarin said sharply. As if reacting to his mood, Ender, the ever-watchful spectral spear, appeared instantly beside him, humming with energy, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Father, can't you just put away the spear? I'm just here as a son to visit his lovely father, Malric replied, clearly having no intention of indulging Ender in his crazed battle appetite. Oof. I have no son like you. You're adopted. I'll be returning you to your real parents soon. Azarin joked without missing a beat, and Ender vanished with a disappointed hum as the hope for battle faded away. Malric didn't reply. He was used to his father's antics. This was the side of the man he hid behind his iron mask, a side rarely shown to others. Malric calmly brought out a bottle of alcohol from his space ring, along with 2 glass cups, and poured it for the both of them. How is he youngest? Malric asked as he took a sip. Where did you get this alcohol? I've never tasted anything like it before, Azarin asked as he stared curiously at the bottle, rolling it slightly in his hand. I simply employed someone whose talent is brewing any drink better than most people, Malric replied, unbothered that Azarin hadn't answered the question he asked about Asher. Be sure to send some of this alcohol my way then, Azarin said as he gulped the entire cup at once like it was a shot, then poured himself another without hesitation. Then a smile appeared on his face as he began to speak. As for your brother, he simply inherited all my talent. I thought I was the one you said inherited all your talents. Malric said with a smirk, amused. You wish, Azarin shot back with a grunt, then began recounting everything Asher had done, right from the very beginning when he had awakened until now. Azarin listed and explained all of Asher's achievements down to the smallest detail, not missing a single one. Since Malric wasn't present during any of it, he had no idea. He had only heard of Asher defeating someone named Ryan, but when he searched his memory, he couldn't even remember who Ryan was. So, he classified him as another irrelevant character. Malric simply nodded and didn't interrupt, letting Azarin continue speaking and boasting. If Asher is about to die tomorrow, would you intervene? Malric suddenly asked. I wouldn't, Azarin answered immediately, not wasting even a second to think. Why? Malric asked again, clearly surprised. He had expected his father to say yes. He knew just how deeply Azarin cared for Asher, how far the man was willing to go. Hearing him say no caught him off guard. Why should I? When I know you will, Azarin replied with a knowing smile. Malric paused. His entire train of thought seemed to halt for a second as he finally understood the meaning behind his father's answer. Has father started using his brain, or am I just that predictable these days? Malric murmured under his breath, though Azarin could hear him loud and clear. If I couldn't use my brain, how could I have gotten over half of Silvershade's yearly earnings? That's something even you can't pull off, Azarin snorted in response. But Malric didn't reply. He believed the man was simply lucky and had played an unknown card at the right time. I don't think the youngest will need to be saved tomorrow, Malric said with a smile forming on his lips. And why do you think so? Azarin asked with a calm tone as he poured himself another glass of alcohol, curious about the reasoning. Because he is special, Malric replied, his gaze distant, his thoughts clearly drifting somewhere far from the room they sat in. Enough talk about my last son. What about you? How are you feeling? Do you need your father's help to handle some people? Azarin asked with mock concern. Well, everything's good on my end. I'm just waiting for a few key pieces to fall into place before I wipe out all the Amoviri in fallen heaven. Malric replied as he swirled the alcohol in his glass, eyes sharp. Can I come? Azarin asked, a slight eagerness in his voice, clearly wanting a piece of the action. Nope, it would no longer be fun for me if we had to share praise, Malric replied calmly. Azarin chuckled and nodded. His first son had always handled things on his own. When will I ever get the chance to help this brat with anything in this life? Azarin wondered, a heavy sigh forming silently in his thoughts. The discussion between father and son continued well into the evening as they waited for the next day to arrive. But they weren't the only ones waiting. Every wargrave was for it. Asher walked around the wargrave estate without a particular direction in mind. He remembered the first time he had left his room after his transmigration. The sheer amount of opulence he had seen had been overwhelming. He remembered seeing the knights as they trained, although even now, he still couldn't keep up with their speed, no matter how hard he tried. Lyra walked behind him with steady, composed steps. Unlike Asher, she wasn't really bothered or anxious. She knew her young master well, perhaps better than most. She knew he could easily escape during the true awakening if he wished. She had seen him teleport to his room numerous times over the past 5 months. Although she didn't really know how strong Asher had become now, she had no doubt that he would return her to the Wargrave estate. As Asher walked, just about to cut a corner, his omni-perception instantly sensed someone in that direction. His footsteps paused for a split second before he continued. As he turned the corner, he saw her, one of his siblings, one he had never met before. She stood over 6 feet in height, with flowing green hair and deep black eyes. Her body was the very epitome of a bombshell. She had a slim, curved waist that seemed to connect her upper and lower frame with utter perfection, exuding the kind of beauty that couldn't be ignored. The lighting of the hallway seemed to bounce off her skin in a soft illumination, enhancing her appearance as though the Wargrave bloodline itself had taken its time sculpting her beauty. She was, after all, the first daughter of the current Primarch. A belt hung snugly around her waist, with various types of daggers fastened to it, each one gleaming faintly. Within Asher's omni-perception, he could sense several more daggers carefully hidden all over her body, daggers most people wouldn't even notice unless they looked very closely. She wore a sleek black top that stopped just above her belly button, paired with matching black trousers and gloves. She moved with extremely silent steps, almost as though the floor beneath her didn't register her presence at all. The second moon, with Thenia Wargrave. Asher's distinct purple eyes met her black ones. He could see the signature, expressionless look that the Wargrave family was known for. But the moment Withenia saw Asher, she smiled and spoke before he could even open his mouth. "If it isn't the youngest genius," Withenia said teasingly. "Good afternoon, Sister Withenia," Asher replied politely, although he didn't quite know how to talk to her. After his failed awakening, he had basically been ignored from the very beginning. Although he was still being ignored and only spoken to when physically encountered, it was still, "Oh, would you look at that? Radiant Kindlestar in only 6 months. It seems the youngest really is a genius." Withenia teased again, her tone light, but with a hint of genuine interest. Asher's face shifted subtly into one of mild surprise, as though he couldn't believe someone had seen through his life rank. Asher wasn't so naive as to think that just because most people could easily hide their life rank meant others didn't have special ways of seeing through it. "It's expected of a Wargrave, Sister Withenia," Asher calmly replied. Without realizing it, the two of them had begun walking in the same direction, even though they had been heading in opposite ones just moments before. Meh, no need to be so modest. Even Father and Big Bro, who are both tagged as monsters, didn't reach Radiant Kindlestar in just half a year. Withenia's tone was casual, but Asher could sense the pride in her words. Asher didn't know what to say, so he simply smiled instead of replying. Deep down, however, he was a bit confused. From what he could recall, he had never met Withenia personally, maybe once or twice when he was around 5 years old, but certainly not in recent times. Yet, Withenia spoke to him as though they had known each other for years. Asher couldn't help but wonder if there was a gap in his memories. Although Asher didn't look at her directly, his omni-perception allowed him to get a clear view of her, the way she walked, the tone of her voice, the grace of her body. It was no wonder people looked at her with a mixture of admiration and desire, and why Malric had killed all of them in her name, under the justification of Big Bro. "Stop staring, Ash," Withenia said as she walked, already shortening his name. How did she know? Such perception, Asher thought, inwardly impressed. "I wasn't staring," Asher replied smoothly. I was just thinking about how strong you are. Oh, you want to spar with Big Sis to find out? Withenia asked, almost as if she were excited by the idea. But Asher had no intention of getting wrecked just a day before his true awakening. Maybe another time, Sister Withenia, he responded simply. Lyra remained a few steps behind, never speaking, never making her presence known. She simply faded into the background, yet she was always present, always alert, ready to act if her young master needed her. Within a few minutes, Withenia and Asher arrived at Asher's room. Stopping at the door, Withenia turned to him and said, "Don't die, Ash. After all, we've never lost a sibling to the true awakening." Before Asher could even give a reply, she vanished before his very eyes. What happened to walking? Can everyone just stop disappearing like that? Asher thought with a sigh. Malric had done the same thing when they had first met, disappearing in the exact same way. Asher didn't believe they were using teleportation. He simply believed their speed was just that ridiculous. Shaking his head with a soft sigh, Asher opened his door and stepped inside. Ash isn't a bad name. Has a nice ring to it. Maybe this family isn't as bad as I've been thinking it is, he mused. He had met the first son and the second moon, both of whom seemed like great people. Only the ninth son had been different, but Asher couldn't care less about that. Lyra, Asher called out. The door opened as Lyra stepped in without hesitation. I'll be going to bed at exactly 7 p.m. today. Prepare dinner before then, Asher instructed. Lyra simply nodded and then left, as silently as she had entered. Although Asher had no intention of training today, he wasn't just going to lie around doing nothing either. He would at least stretch his body and keep himself active. And with that, he began sit-ups, push-ups, high planks, then transitioned into calisthenics to maintain fluidity and balance. Hours passed as evening slowly approached. Sweat dripped from various parts of his body. His muscles felt alive, limber, and ready to move. Asher hadn't pushed himself to the brink, as this wasn't meant to be a training session. After a quick bath, he changed into his night clothes, then sat down and ate the food Lyra had brought him. At exactly 7 p.m., he was already in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow it will begin, Asher thought, then closed his eyes. And with that, the dream world consumed him whole. As Asher slept soundly, a cold gust of wind brushed against his skin, rousing a faint shiver. He shifted slightly, hands reaching to adjust the duvet and pull it tighter around him. Yet, midway through the motion, he froze. In the next breath, he sprang to his feet, his senses flaring as his eyes snapped open. His surroundings bled into his vision, gradually sharpening. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its silvery glow across the landscape below. Trees, grass, and endless stretches of greenery extended for kilometers, cloaked in a creeping darkness that blanketed the earth, only barely pierced by the moonlight's pale touch. A gentle white fog clung to the air, drifting silently between trees and along the ground. It moved with an eerie grace, occasionally stirred and carried by the breath of the night wind. Where am I? Asher wondered, his mind spinning. He had gone to bed at exactly 7 p.m., yet now he stood here in an unfamiliar place. He had no memory of being moved, no recollection of when or how it had happened. The true awakening. He didn't need to guess. He already understood. No assassin could have infiltrated the Wargrave estate, not while the entire family was present. And even if some assassin with an overpowered ability had managed to slip through their defenses, they wouldn't have wasted time relocating him. They would have killed him where he lay, not left him in the middle of the forest. Zarek? Or someone else? Asher mused, eyes narrowing. Zarek had always managed to bypass his omniperception, an ability that functioned even while he slept. But that didn't necessarily mean Zarek was the only one capable of slipping past it. Perhaps others could as well, and simply never care to bother. System. What time is it? Asher asked silently. Ding. 12:02 a.m. Asher frowned. That wasn't quite right. He was convinced the Wargrave estate had initiated the true awakening precisely at midnight. 2 minutes difference. Does that mean I'm only 2 minutes away from the estate? he speculated, but quickly dismissed the idea. With individuals like the first sun and second moon, whose speed defied comprehension, distance became meaningless. Who could say how many kilometers they could cross in the span of a single breath? System, where am I? Asher asked inwardly. Ding. The system is not a map, and therefore cannot determine your location. The system is already doing more than enough functioning as your personal alarm and clock. Asher read the notification without the slightest hint of surprise. From a moment he had woken until now, not even a full minute had passed. His thought process operated at such a rapid pace. Asher's hands moved instinctively over his body, searching, hoping for something. A clue, a sign, anything his family might have left behind. His fingers brushed against his pocket, and he felt the unmistakable texture of parchment. Retrieving it at once, he unfolded and read the brief message. Survive until sunrise, or return on your own before then, if you can. No guidance, no aid, just a challenge masked as a test. Sunrise, which typically broke around 6:30 a.m., was now his silent deadline. System, set an alarm for 6:30 a.m. Asher commanded mentally. Ding. Affirmative host. Alarm set. With no time to waste, Asher vanished in an instant, his form a blur as he shot up the nearest tree, feet gliding effortlessly along its trunk before disappearing into the dense canopy above. He concealed himself among the thick branches and leaves, the perfect vantage point from which to observe and prepare. The trees here towered high, each one standing no less than 4 meters tall, as though reaching greedily for the sky itself. The moment he read the word survive, Asher knew something wasn't right. He couldn't say what it was, but he felt it. Something was coming. Hidden among the foliage, he stilled himself. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. His presence faded into the night, yet every muscle in his body remained coiled, taut with readiness. He was a phantom in the trees, poised to strike or vanish at the first sign of danger. Asher's senses flared. Something had entered the edge of his omniperception. He didn't hesitate. There was no time to think, only to act. Virilis flashed into existence in his hand, its edge gleaming with lethal purpose. In the same instant, Asher turned, his body already in motion. With one swift, fluid strike, the blade streaked forward and a head was severed cleanly from its body. A spray of green blood arced through the air as a massive, 3-meter-long serpent collapsed lifelessly across the branches. Asher didn't linger. He launched himself forward, leaping from one tree to the next, gliding between branches and shadows like a creature born of the forest. Only once he had put distance between himself and the kill did he settle into another high perch, shrouded once more by leaves and silence. Then he vanished again into stillness, watching, waiting. He was certain the scent of blood from the slain serpent would draw more monsters to the area. But Asher hadn't come to fight. His only goal was to survive until sunrise. Though he possessed the means to teleport back to the safety of his room, and in it all, he refrained. Something deeper compelled him, the desire to witness the true awakening for himself. With Virilis hovering silently behind him, Asher lowered into a crouch, his presence dissolving into the bark and shadows of the tree, as though he had become one with the forest itself. Suddenly, a long, slender projectile sliced through the air with a sharp whistle, hurtling toward his position with deadly precision. I've been made, Asher thought. He didn't flinch. In a flash, his rapier flickered into motion, effortlessly deflecting the arrow. But, boom! The air shattered with a thunderous explosion. The arrow detonated on impact, obliterating the tree he had been concealed within. Bark splintered into twigs, and leaves ignited midair, swirling backward under the force of the blast. The sheer impact hurled Asher through the forest like a torn kite. His body crashed into another tree with bone-rattling force, before plummeting from several meters above. Yet like a spectral feline, Asher twisted mid-fall and landed lightly on his feet. Without pause, he shifted into motion as he pushed forward, his senses flaring, eyes scanning the smoke and flame, searching for the one who had fired the arrow. The acrid scent of burnt flesh clung to him as wisps of smoke curled from his battered frame. Blood trickled from countless wounds that marred his body, while his clothes, face, and hair bore the scorch marks of the explosion, charred, torn, and blackened. With a single strike, Asher Wargrave, the monster, had been wounded. Although Asher understood that the true awakening was a trial of survival, he had no intention of spending the entire duration in retreat. Constantly fleeing for 6 hours would leave him on the defensive, offering no tactical advantage, a risk far too great to ignore. With that thought, the moment his feet touched the ground, he propelled himself forward, slicing through the air as his form surged in the direction from which the arrow had been fired. His eyes narrowed, and his senses sharpened, scanning through the swirling smoke and lingering flames from the explosion. Though darkness veiled the entire forest, Asher saw everything within his omni-perception with crystal clarity, each detail illuminated as if under the midday sun. Beyond the bounds of his omni-perception, his vision subtly adjusted to the shadows, adapting seamlessly to the natural gloom. Pain flared violently from his wound, a searing explosion across his nerves, but Asher paid it no mind. His focus had narrowed to a singular, all-consuming intent: kill. Within the range of his omni-perception, 2 figures emerged. One, a nimble archer, was already vaulting toward another tree. The other surged forward, daggers gleaming in hand, closing the distance with deadly intent. Assassins, Asher thought coldly. As the dagger-wielding assassin lunged forward, his blade snapped toward Asher's eyes, gleaming with murderous intent. But Asher merely sidestepped, effortlessly slipping past the strike. He didn't retaliate, at least not directly. Instead, his body blurred forward, leaving the assassin behind as he sprinted toward the archer. A flicker of confusion crossed the assassin's face, its mind barely beginning to register the anomaly. But it never got the chance to understand. In a flash of silver, Virilis moved of its own accord, carving through the assassin's neck in a single, fluid stroke. Another arrow whistled through the air toward Asher, its sound sharp and lethal. This time, he didn't dare to deflect it. Instead, he dodged. But in the span of that single moment, time seemed to distort. His instinctive adaptation surged to life. Lightning crackled violently across his body as purple arcs danced over his skin. In an instant, he vanished, disappearing in a bolt of electricity just as his senses detected the arrow swelling, on the verge of detonation. A heartbeat later, the explosion ripped through the forest, but Asher was already gone. He reappeared directly in front of the archer, his fist rocketing forward with the intensity and force of a high-caliber sniper round. The sudden burst of speed caught the archer off guard. He simply couldn't keep up. Asher's fist crashed into his face with brutal force, snapping his head violently to the side. But the archer reacted with practiced motion. This wasn't his first mission. Using the momentum from the blow, he twisted away, creating distance as his fingers moved fluidly, already drawing his bowstring and reaching for another arrow. But Asher wouldn't give him the chance. Now that he understood the true danger, those arrows could detonate on command, he moved in again like a phantom. In the blink of an eye, Virilis appeared in his grip as if it had materialized from thin air. His arm blurred, and in one savage motion, the blade's gleaming edge tore through the archer's throat, clean as a razor slicing paper. The archer staggered as his world tilted unnaturally. His vision fractured. His clarity faded. A geyser of crimson erupted from his neck, painting the air in red as the last of his strength drained away. Asher's gaze snapped to the side, his senses already registering movement. Monsters drawn by the noise and the scent of fresh blood were closing in. Virilis responded without delay. It activated Crimson Pact, and at once, blood surged from the fallen assassins in rippling waves, pulled as though summoned by an unseen force. The crimson tide spiraled through the air before converging on the blade. Moments later, Asher's wounds began to seal. Flesh knit itself together with supernatural efficiency. Charred skin gave way to fresh new layers, and even his scorched hair began to regenerate. The searing pain that had racked his body dulled, then vanished entirely. Something stirred within Asher, a subtle, uneasy ripple across his consciousness. This had been his first kill. Even though it was an assassin who had come for his life, the weight of taking a life felt no lighter. But before that feeling could rise, before it could shape itself into guilt or doubt, Asher crushed it. There was no room for hesitation in a world like Crymora, especially not during the true awakening. With his injuries fully mended, Asher turned to move. He had no intention of engaging the incoming monsters. Not yet. He needed to conserve his energy. Every ounce of it would count before the 6 hours were over. With his muscles coiled like a compressed spring, Asher was ready to launch forward, until a piercing screech shattered the air above him. Skreya! His head snapped upward, eyes locking onto a monstrous owl hurtling down from the night sky like a feathered missile. Fast! Asher noted, his thoughts sharp, but he was faster. He had no intention of wasting time on a single beast. Lightning crackled violently along Virilis, its edge humming with raw energy. Thunder rumbled through the forest as Asher raised the blade in a swift, fluid motion. With a single strike, a blinding arc of purple lightning surged upward, an electrified crescent slash unleashed with lethal intent. The owl attempted to veer off, wings flapping as it twisted midair to avoid the attack, but it was futile. The lightning slash cleaved through its body cleanly, slicing it in two with surgical precision. The halves spiraled in opposite directions, perfectly symmetrical, as the creature's remains crashed to the forest floor. Asher didn't pause to admire the clean kill. Without hesitation, he vaulted from the tree canopy, leaping to another branch with fluid movement. The trees hissed with the sound of disturbed snakes, but their aggression was short-lived. Without Asher, so much as lifting a finger, Virilis acted. The blade lashed out on instinct, shredding the serpents mid-strike, their bodies falling in pieces behind him. Landing silently, Asher crouched low in the shadows of a thick branch, choosing a new vantage point. His breathing slowed, heart rate steadying, and his mind began to churn. Was it the family that sent those assassins? He wondered, his thoughts circling back to the two fallen enemies. Asher was no fool. His intellect was razor-sharp. With only a handful of clues, he could begin to piece together the larger game at play. Is this the true awakening? He thought. The Wargraves send assassins after their sun and moon, forcing them into bloodshed, attrition, and death from an early age. And if they survive, they're forged into something more. His eyes narrowed slightly, and the assassins won't stop coming. Their only goal is to complete the mission before dawn. His conclusion came cold and certain. If that's true, then someone is watching, everyone maybe. The entire Wargrave family could be observing, measuring me. There's no reason for all of them to return for the true awakening without some deeper purpose behind it. As this realization struck, Asher's head subtly turned, his eyes scanning the shadows of the forest as if trying to locate the hidden camera of this era. The unseen, he was sure was tracking his every move. But after a moment, he gave up the search, finding it wouldn't improve his odds of survival, and it might only make it easier for the next assassin to find him. Asher's breathing gradually leveled as he focused on recovering the stamina and astra he had already expended. Though he wasn't anywhere near depletion, he understood the value of maintaining peak condition, especially in a trial where death could arrive without warning. But even in stillness, his awareness remained razor-sharp, never slipping for a single second. Every rustle, every distant sound was registered and assessed. Rest might be necessary, but vulnerability was never an option. A few seconds passed as Astra surged toward Asher, flooding his Astra veins with radiant energy. He doubted the assassins could track him through the Astra he drew. After all, throughout the forest, countless monsters also absorbed Astra in varying degrees. In this chaotic symphony of energy, he was merely one among millions, an indistinguishable current in a vast, flowing Astra. The perfect cover. Amid the stillness, the system's chime broke the silence. Ding! Illusion mind invasion detected. Mind shield activated. Asher's breath caught as the notification flickered before him. An illusion, he realized. Not even a minute had passed since he concealed himself, yet he had already been discovered. Just like before with the arrow, he had barely hidden for a few seconds before being exposed. Though the system warned him of the illusion, Asher remained motionless. He didn't react. Instead, he stood still, his body slack, eyes distant, like a man truly caught within the illusion's grasp. Within moments, another assassin emerged atop the tree. She didn't hesitate. Every passing second was an opportunity for her target to shatter the illusion. Closing the distance in a swift, silent dash, the bracers on her forearms shifted with a faint metallic whisper as twin hidden blades extended downward. Their sleek edges glinted beneath the moon's silver light. Without pause, she swept her arms in a crossing arc, aiming to sever Asher's throat with a meticulous twin blade strike. But before her blades could so much as graze Asher, Virilis materialized in a blur of light and shadow, flashing in a single, merciless movement. The assassin's breath caught as a searing pain exploded through her arms. Both forearms fell, severed cleanly at the wrist. Blood erupted in twin arcs, painting the air in crimson. Her mouth opened to scream, but before sound could escape, Asher was already behind her. His hand clamped around her neck like iron. With a sharp, brutal twist, a sickening crack echoed through the stillness of the night, and the light in her eyes vanished into the void. A faint whistle cut through the air, a sound only sharpened senses could catch. It struck Asher's ears like a warning bell. Within the scope of his omni-perception, the incoming projectiles revealed themselves, sunborn, fine, slender throwing needles. Their tips shimmered with a dark green sheen. Poison. He didn't need to wonder. He recognized the toxin at a glance. Without a command, Virilis flashed behind him. Its form twisted midair, transforming into a silver streak that danced across the canopy. Ding, 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 ding. The sound rang out in rapid succession, like a deadly melody echoing through the treetops, as Virilis effortlessly deflected every sunborn in a flawless arc. This was Asher's way of conserving stamina. Trivial threats like this, or even the silent death of the first assassin, were well within Virilis's capabilities. There was no need for him to lift a finger. Suddenly, Asher's instinctive adaptation flared to life. In an instant, his body vanished from the tree branch and reappeared atop another. But he was too late. Pain erupted at his heel, sharp and burning. His eyes flicked toward the branch he had just vacated, and there he saw it, a hand retreating into the ground, a blood-stained dagger gripped tightly in its grasp. Asher's expression darkened. He knew it. The earth below his feet was the blind spot of his omni-perception. It couldn't penetrate beneath the surface. Although he'd sensed the dagger's hilt just as it broke through the soil, the reaction window had been too narrow. Dodging without injury had been impossible. The strike had been accurate, aimed at his Achilles tendon, a calculated attempt to cripple his movement. But it was futile. Even before the blood had time to trail down his skin, the wound closed in an instant, sealing shut as if it had never been there. His foot whole once more. Virilis, his soul-bound weapon, didn't need to be in hand to heal him. It mended his wounds from anywhere, its will intertwined with his own. Asher dropped from a tree in a fluid motion. The moment his feet touched the ground, he felt it, the sudden emergence of heat. What had been a calm, eerie air turned blistering in an instant, and then it spiked violently. His purple eyes snapped toward the source. A roaring wave of fire surged toward him, devouring everything in its path. But Asher didn't flinch. He didn't wait for the inferno to reach him. Instead, he charged toward it. Just as his body launched forward, purple lightning crackled to life around him, encasing his entire frame in a violent lightning storm. Without hesitation, he plunged headfirst into the oncoming blaze, no fear, No pause, only motion. The searing heat crashed against his skin, but he felt nothing. The lightning cloaking his body repelled the flames, shielding him as he tore through the inferno with unrelenting force. He burst from the other side, steam trailing behind him as the lightning veil dissipated. His gaze, those vivid purple eyes, locked onto the assassin standing just ahead, frozen in disbelief. The man hadn't expected him to charge through the fire. The shock on his face said it all. But Asher wasn't here to marvel at his reaction. Lightning arced across his arm, dancing wildly across his skin as he closed the distance in a heartbeat. Then a wet, ripping sound. Asher's hand punched clean through the assassin's chest. Flesh gave way like molten butter, sizzling and parting around the crackling energy. His arm erupted out of the man's back, fist clenched around a still-beating heart. The air split again with sharp whistles as more needles tore toward him. From all directions, arrows followed, raining down in unison. They converged upon him like a collapsing dome, each projectile seeking to pierce and tear, as if to reduce him to a ragged heap riddled with holes. Feeling the threat swarm in, Asher's hand tightened. The heart in his grasp was crushed into pulp. Without hesitation, he seized the lifeless assassin by the collar and hurled the body toward one of the incoming volleys. The corpse spun midair, intercepting a needle with a dull thud as the deadly storm closed in. Without the slightest hesitation, Asher dropped into a stance. Virilis vanished from wherever it had been, only to reappear instantly in his grasp, drawn to him like a loyal phantom. Purple lightning bloomed. Astra surged through his veins, igniting his body and rapier in radiant arcs of violent energy. The air trembled around him. The assassins, sensing what was coming, leapt backward in instinctive panic, desperate to escape the surge they could feel gathering. But it was far too late. In a single, fluid motion, Asher spun, executing a full 360-degree slash with his rapier. Thunder exploded. The air ruptured with an ear-splitting boom as a massive ring of purple lightning, shaped like a spinning blade, erupted outward in a storming wave of destruction. The wave consumed everything. Arrows and needles disintegrated midair, reduced to nothing within the blinding surge. Trees were cleaved apart like twigs, the ground erupted with concussive force, and lightning danced wildly, tearing, coiling, devouring everything in its path. The assassins didn't stand a chance. The moment the wave reached them, they were engulfed. Screams were snatched away by the roaring storm. Their bodies charred and shredded before they could finish turning to run. The scent of scorched flesh filled the air. Where once there had been coordinated killers and towering trees, now only smoldering corpses and broken earth remained, littered across a battlefield baptized in lightning. Asher stood upon the destruction like he was a god, as purple lightning ran through his form, his rapier in hand, his purple eyes glowing under the moonlight, his purple hair dancing to the rhythm of his own destruction. Within the Wargrave estate, in a particular hall, chairs stretched out as every member of the family gathered to watch the 10th son's true awakening. The true awakening was a ceremony where the Wargraves revealed the true nature of the world to their descendants just 6 months after their initial awakening. They were thrown into a battlefield at an unknown time and told to survive while the rest of the family watched from afar. During the true awakening, many Wargraves had died. The Wargraves watched them perish without moving a finger to save anyone due to family tradition and law. And it was the same here. If Asher Wargrave was about to fall, no one would make a move to save him from not overcoming his reality. Within the hall, not a single aura dared to flare or fold the air in the presence of the Primarch. On a table in front of everyone, a blue orb could be seen resting as it shone brightly. Various heads-up displays popped up in front of everyone gathered. They all watched Asher instantly jump to his feet and retrieve the parchment from his pocket just a second after waking up. They saw him scale a tree immediately after that and hide, and then they saw him tank an explosion from an arrow. They had expected him to make a run for it the moment he jumped down from the tree. After all, the parchment said survive. But no, he had taken a different route by attacking instead. This singular decision earned a lot of approval from all the Wargraves. This was their way of combat. They never ran or hid. Although in this moment, one could hide, set up ambushes, and lay traps due to the situation, they still loved how the 10th son handled things. Although they were Wargraves, it didn't mean they were all muscles and no brains all the time. They were all muscles and no brains only when the situation required it. And this situation required some brains. They watched him cleave an owl into perfect, symmetrical halves with just a swing of his rapier. They watched as Virilis moved without her master, instantly decapitating the first dagger assassin, then wiping out various snake monsters, deflecting throwing needles coated in poison, single-handedly holding her own against some assassins while also healing her master. If Asher wasn't such a genius, Virilis would have been the star of the show. She must have waited for this very moment to fight for her master. At this moment, some Wargraves already had soft smiles on their faces as they watched Asher. This was the Wargrave way. No panic, no questions, no hesitation. Just pure action. Just pure massacre. Just pure bloodbath. The three great elders sat in calm silence, their gazes locked onto the display in front of them. The librarian, named More Than Wargrave, who was the first great elder Asher had ever met, spoke. It seems the 10th son has been hiding quite deeply. He loved the way Asher moved, and a smile appeared on his face. Indeed, we didn't pay attention to him due to awakening on his third try, and he turns out to be a bigger monster, Casimir Wargrave, the second great elder, added. It also seems the 10th son has inherited Lily's talent for the rapier. Belmira Wargrave, the third great elder, added from the side. Many of those in the room nodded. They couldn't deny Asher's talent. They simply hadn't paid any attention to him because of his third awakening. Besides, the suns and moons only started receiving real attention from other family members when they survived the true awakening. At least now we know the ability of his rapier, but I wonder if he could heal other people with it besides himself. An elder spoke calmly as she stared at the screen, watching Asher's Achilles tendon mend like it was nothing. The elder was named Damaris Wargrave, the Primarch's sister. Everyone within the room nodded, as healing abilities were always welcomed anywhere. And if it was something that could heal others, not just the wielder, even better. The rapier also seems to protect the youngest against illusion. Withenia Wargrave spoke with a smile, her legs crossed over the other, her black eyes fixed on her brother, who battled for his life. But not only that, maybe it could also protect him from other types of mind abilities and skills, and not just illusions, Malric Wargrave added from the side. He too had a smile on his face. Or it could mean he indeed fell for the illusion, but the rapier didn't, and it protected him. The rapier interfering might be what broke the illusion. Another elder named Sarion Wargrave added from the side as he analyzed. That could also be true. Malric replied with a nod as they dissected everything Asher displayed, down to its lowest form. As they watched him dive headfirst into a fire wave coming from the side, grins spread across almost every face present. They watched as he coated himself in purple lightning before tearing out the heart of an assassin, then proceeded to unleash a sword attack. They weren't surprised by his lightning element. Although every Wargrave awakened an element, it wasn't unique to them. Other people had awakened such elements in the family's past, and others in the world also possessed the same elements. Asher wasn't the only lightning wielder in the world, but just because a group of people had the same element didn't mean they all possessed the same control and pure firepower. At the center of the room, Azarin sat with calm composure. This wasn't the first time he was watching the true awakening. He had watched his siblings, the elders, go through their true awakening. He had watched his 9 children go through the same process, and now he was watching the 10th son do the same. Although he loved Asher and wanted to protect him, Azarin would never coddle him. He wouldn't stop events like the true awakening. The Wargraves were beings molded in battle, and he would watch his son be molded and come out on top. He wasn't worried about Asher losing a limb and being unable to regenerate it. People with healing abilities were already on standby. Besides, nobody, not a single Wargrave, not Azarin Wargrave, not Mauric Wargrave, who were considered monsters, walked out of the true awakening without a missing limb. Missing limbs or body parts like eyes, ears, and others were the norm within the true awakening. After all, a 15-year-old child without any real battle experience was thrust into a forest filled with wild, savage beasts and a group of assassins who would stop at nothing to claim his head. To the Wargraves, survival was never about luck. It was about instinct, strength, decisiveness, and the will to live, even if it meant tearing through blood, limbs, and death itself. And at this moment, in this hall filled with silence and subtle grins, one thing became clear. The 10th sun was shining far brighter than they ever expected, and they fucking loved every bit of it. At the back, Tharic Wargrave sat as he watched in disbelief. He had expected Asher to be nothing but trash, but now his hope had been dashed once more, just like when he believed Asher would fail his awakening yet again. But he couldn't speak. After all, he was the weakest within this group of monsters in human skin. Asher stood with composed stillness, his gaze sweeping over the devastation he had unleashed. His eyes moved swiftly, examining each fallen assassin ensnared within the radius of his attack. None had survived. Without another glance, he began to turn. He couldn't afford to remain here any longer. He needed to move. But the moment his head shifted, a massive claw tore through his vision with terrifying speed. Before thought could intervene, Asher's body responded instinctively. Instinctive adaptation ignited once more. His spine arched fluidly, bending backward until his body aligned parallel to the earth beneath him. The wind screamed as the claw cleaved through the space where his head had just been, the deafening rush slamming against Asher's eardrums. He didn't hesitate. Even before the echo had faded, Astra surged to his feet, and his figure blurred, vanishing from the spot as he widened the distance between himself and whatever had just tried to take his head. His head snapped forward, eyes locking onto the very spot he had occupied mere seconds ago. His omni-perception hadn't sensed a thing. If he hadn't turned at that exact moment, hadn't reacted purely on instinct, his skull would have been split open and his brain torn from his body. It was a sleek obsidian panther, tall, menacing, and unnaturally still. Its tail swayed with an eerie calm, curling through the air in slow, deliberate motions. Darkness clung to its form like a second skin, as though the very shadows of the forest bent to cradle it. Its jet-black eyes locked onto Asher's glowing purple gaze, an abyss staring into another abyss. Veil ranked, Asher noted silently. He had spent the last 5 months battling creatures of that rank. But not all monsters within the same rank were created equal. Some stood leagues above their kin. And this panther radiated a quiet supremacy that placed it far beyond a standard Veil rank beast. Asher's mind raced. It bypassed my omni-perception. That could only mean one thing. It possessed some form of stealth or an ability that masked its presence entirely. Coupled with its overwhelming speed and raw physical power, it was a predator built for assassination. Though his gaze remained locked on the panther, his awareness extended outward, sweeping the surroundings. He didn't believe for a second that the assassins were finished, not simply because a few had fallen. He had been spotted effortlessly, twice, mere seconds after concealing himself. That wasn't coincidence. Asher had already drawn a grim conclusion. He'd been marked. By what? He couldn't say, but something clung to him, revealing his position to his pursuers like a beacon in the dark. Asher didn't waste time searching for the source. He already knew. It was the Wargraves. Of course it was. They wouldn't simply allow the suns and moons to hide and wait out the 6 hours. That would defeat the very essence of the true awakening. He understood the assassins' next move before they even made it. They would stay hidden, patient, and calculating. Attacking now would be foolish. No, far better to let the panther and whatever other beasts wear him down or kill him outright. If he survived, it would be with drained Astra and shattered stamina. Asher couldn't deny it. Had their roles been reversed, he would have made the same call. It was a flawless strategy. The Black Panther, seeing its prey merely staring back, lunged without hesitation. Its form blurred into motion, tail swirling like a ribbon of darkness, guiding its agility, amplifying its speed. Its claws gleamed with pure blackness, a void-like sheen, as they carved through the air, aimed straight for Asher's eyes. But this time, omni-perception caught it. Asher moved with explosive maneuver. Astra surged beneath his feet, launching him forward like a bolt unchained. His muscles coiled, his instincts sharpened, and in his grip, Virilis shimmered with anticipation, as if thirsting for blood once more. With a thunderous crash, Virilis met Claw. Sparks erupted in a brilliant flare, only to be swallowed whole by the surrounding darkness, devoured as if the abyss itself had opened to consume the light. The soil beneath Asher's feet exploded backward as he launched himself forward, colliding with the panther in a relentless exchange of rapid, razor-precise strikes. Claws and paws came from every direction, but Asher met each one with composed grace, his movements fluid, measured chaos met with calm mastery. Yet he knew he couldn't afford to drag this out. There were more enemies lurking beyond the treeline, watching. He could feel their eyes like talons in the dark, waiting to strike the moment he faltered. Crackling lightning surged across his frame, wrapping him in electric fury as he lunged to deliver a decisive blow. But the panther's tail twirled once more, its feline body twisting impossibly as it slipped just beyond his reach, vanishing into the shadows and re-establishing distance between them in a blink. But Asher had anticipated the retreat. Virilis shimmered in his grip, its sleek form glowing with radiant purple as arcs of lightning danced along its blade. Then, in a blur so smooth it seemed whispered into reality, he thrust forward. A deafening thunderclap shattered the air. From the rapier exploded a sundering surge of energy, violent and unrelenting, filling every path the panther could have possibly taken to evade. It was as if the very air was swallowed by the strike, leaving no room to escape. The forest trembled. Trees were obliterated, trenches ripped into the earth as the lightning-laced thrust erupted in a frenzy, wild, unforgiving, and on the verge of madness. The attack consumed everything in its path, leaving behind only devastation and the raw scent of scorched life. Asher panted heavily, each breath ragged as his chest rose and fell in sharp rhythm. He fought to steady himself, but fatigue was setting in fast. His stamina was waning, and his Astra, once a surging tide, had thinned to a shallow stream. Dragging the battle out would have been a death sentence. That's why he made the trade, funneling the last of his Astra into a single, devastating burst. It was a calculated gamble. Asher knew firsthand that Veil-rank beasts couldn't be dispatched easily. A concentrated, wide-range attack had been his best, and perhaps only, chance at survival. Sweat streamed down his body, mingling with soot, grime, and drying blood. His already scorched clothes clung to him like a second skin, torn and darkened, a testament to the brutal toll of battle. As Asher leaned against a tree, his senses flared once more. Danger. A hand erupted from the bark behind him, dagger in hand, slicing toward his throat with silent accuracy. It was the same assassin who had severed his Achilles tendon before. Asher had suspected he was still lurking nearby, and this moment of perceived weakness was the perfect opportunity to strike. But Asher was prepared. Virilis possessed a third ability, Astra Veil, which allowed her to store up to 30% of Asher's total Astra and transfer it to him instantly, without any drawn-out channeling process. This was why Asher hadn't hesitated to expend all of his Astra in the battle against the Panther. He had a backup. The very moment he had launched that devastating attack, he had already drawn Virilis's reserve into his Astra veins. As the blade shot toward his neck, Asher didn't dodge. He attacked. Lightning bloomed violently across his body, racing through the tree like a storm let loose. In a single, explosive burst, the entire trunk erupted, splintering apart with a thunderous crack. But it wasn't only bark that burned. The assassin's scream was brief, cut off as the scent of scorched flesh filled the air. A heavy thud followed as his charred body, crashed to the ground, lifeless. Asher exhaled, and the lightning calamity vanished under the control. Leaning against the tree had never been a moment of weakness. It was a trap, a calculated lure meant to funnel the assassin into a singular path, the tree itself. With nowhere else to strike from, the assassin had played directly into Asher's hand, and the plan had worked flawlessly. Asher remained motionless, his gaze fixed ahead as his breathing gradually steadied. He was fully aware that he was being tracked, and given the number of assassins lurking nearby, it was wiser to confront them now and consider an escape plan afterward. Besides, with his movements already under surveillance, fleeing would likely prove futile. What he couldn't afford, however, was to be encircled or confined to a single location. Virilis was already drawing Astra from the atmosphere, steadily replenishing her reserves in preparation for when Asher might require them. Meanwhile, Asher's own Astra was recovering passively. Though he had discovered a method to absorb Astra without needing to assume a fixed posture, like the traditional lotus position, it didn't grant him the freedom to draw it under any circumstance. No, the passive intake only functioned during mundane activities such as walking, eating, reading, sitting, or light jogging. Certainly not while engaged in a life-or-death battle. As Asher waited for the assassins to make their move, he used a brief lull to recover his stamina. Then he heard a sound, a clap, 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 clap. His gaze shifted toward the source of the noise, and from the darkness, 5 figures emerged, each wearing a distinct mask that concealed their identity. The one who had been clapping stepped forward, eyes fixed on Asher. His voice carried a mix of amusement and intrigue. I must admit, the Wargrave bloodline truly defies reason. Not even the mediocrity of a third awakening could restrain it. Asher remained silent. He offered no reply. Though he wasn't in a villainous monologues and was the type to end things swiftly through combat, he knew better than to waste the opportunity. Every second of stillness allowed his body to recover just a little more. I'd heard rumors, the assassin continued, his tone both mocking and impressed. They said you defeated the son of Duke Rydian Silvershade, but I still expected mediocrity. And yet, here you are, cutting down trained assassins as if they were nothing. Truly remarkable. He took a step closer, a voice now laced with quiet arrogance. I accepted this contract for the prestige it would bring. After all, slaying a Wargrave would do wonders for my reputation. And you've already burned through all your Astra on that panther, and whatever faint remnants remained were spent on the last assassin. The man drew a blade, its edge glinting faintly in the darkness. So, 10th son, Asher Wargrave, do us all a favor and surrender your head before sunrise. After all, this place will be your grave. Of course, the assassin had no idea that Asher had already replenished 30% of his Astra reserves. Without a specialized ability, it was impossible to perceive the quantity of Astra flowing through someone's Astra veins. Asher remained still, eyes fixed ahead as the assassins prepared to strike. Traditionally, assassins were meant to be silent, ghosts in the dark who struck without warning or presence. But these ones were arrogant. System, Asher called out mentally. How much time has passed? Ding. 1 hour and 30 minutes. 5 more hours, Asher thought silently, his expression unreadable. 4 assassins surged forward without hesitation, weapons drawn, their movements swift and deadly as they closed in on Asher. He reacted instantly, his figure blurring as he darted backward, covering several meters in the blink of an eye. But to his frustration, the assassins matched his pace with unnerving ease. Suddenly, a serpentine shape entered his omni-perception, slithering through the air with lethal intent. It lunged at his neck like a viper striking from the shadows. A whip, Asher registered at once. Without hesitation, he raised Virilis to intercept, his hand already in motion. But the whip twisted around the weapon like a living vine, tightening its grip. In the next breath, the assassin yanked viciously, and Virilis was torn from Asher's grasp. But Asher didn't flinch. There was no time to retrieve his weapon. A heavy axe was already descending toward his head. He had no choice but to retreat. With a sharp swish, the axe tore through the air and slammed into the ground, carving a jagged trench several meters long in its wake. Before he could recover, a dagger came sweeping in from the side. Asher reacted instantly. His hand shot out, seizing the assassin's wrist mid-strike. In the same motion, his other hand snapped forward like a bullet, driving upward toward the assassin's chin with brutal force. But the assassin deftly snapped her head to the side, evading the strike with fluid movement. A second dagger materialized in her other hand, thrusting forward like a thong aimed directly at Asher's gut. He immediately released her wrist and twisted away, but the assassin was already one step ahead, anticipating his movement. She closed the gap in an instant, twin daggers flashing as they streaked toward his head. In a brilliant streak of silver, Virilis reappeared in Asher's grip. He raised it to block, but as the weapons were about to clash, something went wrong. The daggers passed straight through his rapier, as though it were made of mist, not metal. And then, with a sickening, flesh-ripping sound, the blade sliced into his chest, tearing through skin and muscle like a lanellum through parchment. Asher's eyes widened in shock as searing pain erupted through his chest, his nervous system lighting up in a storm of agony. Blood burst from the wound in a crimson spray, painting the air around him. Before Virilis could even begin to draw blood for its regenerative effect, a sharp, distinct sound tore through the air twice from opposing directions. His body moved before his mind could catch up. Instinctive adaptation ignited once more, his reflexes prioritizing the deadliest threat. His arm snapped forward, Virilis raised in a desperate attempt to block. But his stamina was all but gone. His strength had been drained to the dregs. Even if he pushed his body further using astral augmentation, it would change nothing, as his enemies could still match his speed effortlessly without doing the same. The hammer crashed against Virilis with the force of a thunderclap, the sound of shattering air reverberating through the forest. A tremendous shock wave tore through Asher's body, his frame buckling beneath the sheer, monstrous impact. Inertia seized him instantly, hurling him sideways like a rag doll. But before he had even crossed a full meter, the second strike landed. A deafening crack rang out as a whip lashed forward with brutal impact, slamming directly into his already wounded chest. The impact detonated through his torso, launching him backward in a violent arc. His body collided with trees, ricocheting from one trunk to another like a broken projectile before finally crashing to the ground, his momentum carving a deep trench through the earth as he skidded to a brutal halt. Asher refused to let the pain cloud his focus. Virilis responded instantly, drawing what little blood remained from the slain assassins nearby. His wounds began to mend, flesh stitching itself back together in slow, painful increments. But not all of them closed. His own lightning had incinerated the bodies, charring them so severely that there was barely any blood left for Virilis to extract. The recovery was incomplete, insufficient. To make matters worse, Virilis couldn't be sent to harvest from nearby monsters. He needed her here, by his side, ready for whatever came next. The assassins could only watch in stunned silence as the blood of their fallen comrades was drawn toward the rapier in Asher's hand. The unnatural sight sent a ripple of unease through them, and without hesitation, they instinctively stepped back. They didn't understand what was happening, but they knew better than to remain too close. Every Wargrave soul weapon was said to possess at least one formidable ability. Until now, Asher's rapier had shown none, something they had noted and waited for. Now that it had revealed its ability, their instincts shifted immediately into caution. As they continued to observe, the assassins noticed something unsettling. Some of the bruises Asher had sustained from crashing against trees and stones were slowly fading, the skin mending itself before their eyes. Then it clicked. The 10th son could heal his injuries. Yet none of them moved. They simply watched, faint smirks curling on their lips, like predators indulging in the final struggles of wounded prey. But then, the healing came to an abrupt halt. The rapier ceased drawing in blood. In that instant, realization struck them like lightning. The blood supply was exhausted, and with it, the weapon's healing ability. Their smiles widened, not with amusement, but with cruel understanding. The 10th son was no longer regenerating. I must admit, this was unexpected, or perhaps exactly what one should expect from a wargrave. The assassin who had spoken earlier remarked, his tone calm, yet laced with intrigue. A soul weapon with healing capabilities? How rare. But even such ability comes with limitations, it seems. This assassin, clearly the leader of the group, had yet to make a single move. He remained at the edge of the battlefield, arms crossed, watching with a detached patience as the other four executed the assault. It appears your rapier requires a source, blood, for its healing to function. And without it, he paused, offering a slight shake of his head, a mockery of regret. What a pity! Yet despite his condescension, he made no move to advance. His caution was deliberate, controlled, though it was widely believed that wargrave soul weapons possessed at least one ability. Those familiar with the bloodline knew better. As a lineage of monsters, their soul weapons bore a minimum of two, one often concealed until the moment it was truly needed. That was why the assassin leader had remained at a distance. He hadn't interfered in the battle, hadn't thrown a single strike. He was watching, waiting for Asher to reveal the rapier's second ability. There was no intelligence on what that ability might be. No records, no whispers in the underworld. But his thoughts told him enough. If the first ability was a rare support type, healing through blood, then the second was almost certainly offensive. And he wasn't going to be the fool who triggered it. That was why he kept his distance, leaving Asher to the four assassins under his command. Because he understood a simple truth. Cornered prey are always the most dangerous. And when it came to wargraves, the line between prey and predator blurred dangerously fast. His words? Nothing but bait, designed to provoke, to draw out the second ability. To an outsider, it might have seemed as though he was wasting precious time by standing idle, doing nothing while the battlefield hung in tense stillness. But the assassin leader knew better. He had time. Roughly 5 hours remained on the clock. All he needed to do was prevent the rapier from claiming another life, thus denying it blood to fuel its healing. That was a simple enough task. After all, this was the true awakening, a sanctioned hunt where assassins were granted a rare and coveted opportunity to kill a wargrave without fear of retribution from the family. Right now, he held every advantage. Even if his target somehow regenerated miraculously, Asher's stamina was still drained. His movements were sluggish. His Astra reserves? Dwindling. At best, he was surviving. At worst, he was cornered prey waiting to fall. The assassin leader could feel the rapier had been drawing Astra from the air after the death of the Black Panther, and it was definitely not for healing. He had guessed it had something to do with Asher's rapier's second ability. Still, he made no move. Charging headfirst into the unknown was the mark of a fool. If it came to that, if Asher forced his hand, he would simply use one of his men to test the waters. Sacrifice was the nature of their craft. They were assassins. They held no sentiment for the lives of their own. Asher, who had been sprawled across the ground, finally rose with a low groan, his body a canvas of injuries etched into him like a second skin. Every muscle throbbed with pain. Yet, amidst the agony, his mind remained sharp. He understood precisely what the assassin was attempting by pointing out his weapon's flaw and maintaining a safe distance. And the assassin had been correct. Without drawing blood, Virilis Crimson Pact was little more than dust, an ability rendered utterly useless. That was one of its inherent weaknesses. Deny it the chance to kill, and it became nothing. Another flaw Asher had uncovered over the past 6 months was even more frustrating. He had no control over the order in which his injuries were healed. Virilis acted on her own accord, mending wounds at random. Were it up to him, he would have prioritized the gaping slash across his chest before the blood drained completely. Asher had spent his time looking for his own weaknesses. He didn't just train like a madman and forgot to check for holes in his own ability and power. No other choice, huh? Asher thought grimly as he rose unsteadily to his feet, legs trembling, barely holding him upright. It was sheer will that kept him standing, nothing more. His body screamed with exhaustion, every muscle steeped in a deep, aching burn. Waves of pain surged through him, yet his mind did not falter. He had spent the past 6 months learning to endure pain, to welcome it like an old companion. Turning his back to the assassin, Asher took a staggered step forward. The assassins watched in silence, unmoving. They could tell he was moments away from collapsing. He slipped behind a massive tree, its broad trunk concealing him completely. There, hidden in the shade of its bark, Virilis hovered gently above him, its presence marked by a faint, sorrowful hum that whispered through the silence. "It's useless, Asher Wargrave. It seems this is where it ends." The assassin leader's voice was calm, final, as he gestured for one of the 4 assassins behind him to finish the job. With steady, unhurried steps, the chosen assassin advanced, a massive axe resting against his shoulder. As he neared the tree where Asher had taken cover, the world abruptly shifted, bathed in a searing, otherworldly purple light. Before the man could so much as blink, Virilis moved. It surged forward in a blur of speed, a phantom of silver vengeance. In a flash, the assassin's head was severed cleanly from his shoulders, the strike so sudden he never even realized he'd been attacked. As for Asher, lightning surged violently across his form, shrouding him in a storm of crackling purple. In an instant, he erased the distance between himself and the assassin leader, moving faster than the eye could follow. One moment, the leader stood composed. The next, Asher appeared before him, his body fully healed, arcs of lightning dancing across his skin, his gaze cold and resolute. How did H? The thought barely formed before Asher's hand drove through his chest with brutal finality, piercing flesh and bone. He had relied on distance, calculated caution, but it hadn't saved him. He died wide-eyed and wordless. "You talk too much," came Asher's hoarse voice, laced with exhaustion and quiet contempt. The remaining 3 assassins froze in disbelief, horror flickering in their eyes as they processed the loss of 2 comrades in mere seconds. But hesitation gave way to instinct. They attacked in unison. Asher only smiled. He raised a single middle finger in reply, calm, mocking, and in the blink of an eye, his form vanished, streaking away in a trail of silver light. He had activated position marker. The assassins were left standing in the oppressive silence, swallowed by the crushing darkness he left behind. Within the Wargrave estate, the family members watched in absolute silence. They watched as 5 assassins encircled Asher. They didn't blink, they simply observed with calm eyes and steady breaths. Then it began. They saw how Asher was gradually being pushed back, further and further. His mind was able to keep up with the situation, calculating every motion and strike, but his stamina did not allow his body to follow through. They watched as attacks rained in from all directions, left, right, above, from every possible angle. Hammer, axe, whip, dagger. They watched his movements closely. They could see the fluidity, the calmness, and the efficiency in each step and swing, like he'd been training in the art of battle for decades. But it wasn't long before Asher's chest was torn open, right in front of their eyes. Still, none of them reacted. Many of them had suffered worse injuries in the past, had lost limbs, had endured horrors far worse than a torn chest. To them, a wound like that was barely worth mentioning. Deep down, none of them wanted Asher to die, simply because he was their family member. Yet even if he were to perish, none of them could intervene. The law of the family forbade it. They watched as the hammer crashed against his rapier with crushing force and weight, before a whip lashed viciously across his chest. The soft smiles that had graced their faces when Asher fought earlier had long since vanished, as if they were never there to begin with. Their cold, neutral expressions returned. They watched as Asher ricocheted from one tree to another, as if he were a mere bouncing ball with no will of his own. They could see his injuries now, the bruises, the torn flesh, the broken bones on his right hand that no longer looked like a hand. It resembled pulp, mangled and useless. The glowing blue orb on the table displayed everything with chilling clarity, as though they themselves were right there in the forest beside him. They watched as the youngest Wargrave's body tore a trench into the ground and remained there, unmoving, as though he were dead. But with their keen, experienced eyes, they could see the subtle rise and fall of his chest. He was still breathing. They continued to observe as Virilis drew blood from the corpses scattered across the battlefield, but his injuries barely healed. The dead simply didn't have enough blood to fuel his recovery. They knew, deep down, it was almost over. Asher had spent all his Astra fighting that monstrous Black Panther. His Astra veins were literally empty now. His weapon could no longer heal him, not without a source of blood. His stamina was completely depleted, bottomed out. They had expected the assassins to act immediately to deliver the final blow while Asher lay there in such a state. But they didn't. The Wargraves, sharp and calculating in moments like Thess-E, could tell what the assassins were thinking. And, truth be told, they had the same thought as the assassins. The way Asher hadn't used any flashy ability until now made it seem as though his weapon possessed only one trick, one ability. Nothing more. They heard the assassin leader's monologue, but none of them reacted. None of them listened. Their minds were elsewhere. They were in the moment, consumed by the tension as a single question echoed through each of their thoughts. Was a Wargrave about to fall here today? They watched without flinching. Their emotions, chilled to the bone, refused to surface. No one dared to speak. They simply watched as one of their own, a member of the Wargrave bloodline, stood at the edge of death's door. Was the youngest going to survive after barely holding out for 2 whole hours? Another question echoed in their minds. But this true awakening was unlike any other. Their gazes shifted toward Azarin, who sat with remarkable calmness, so calm it was as if this deadly trial were no different than an ordinary day at the park. But Azarin could feel their gazes. He knew why they were looking at him like that. Still, he did not react. He didn't move, and he didn't blink. During any Wargrave's true awakening, the sun or moon participating would have their movements tracked and fed to the assassins. This ensured that the sun or moon wouldn't just hide the entire time. However, pinpoint locations were never given. Instead, the assassins were provided with a radius. They had to search within that radius to find the participant. This system granted the sun or moon some breathing room, because the Wargraves knew how brutal and unforgiving their own true awakening trials were. But Asher's case was different. His exact location had been given to all assassins. No radius, no searching, no breathing space. Just a direct path to the target. The rest of the Wargraves weren't fools. They could tell that Asher's position had been compromised at the exact moment Asher had realized it himself. And the responsibility of placing the marker on the sun or moon always fell to the pre-march. It was through this marker that they could watch everything unfold in real time, projected on the heads-up display before them. They knew who was responsible. Azarin. The youngest had been placed in an impossible situation. No rest, no pause, just 2 hours of relentless fighting and movement at monstrous speeds. Deep down, Azarin felt anguish. He had changed this little detail, this cruel alteration, to push Asher to the brink. But he wasn't in anguish because of guilt. No, Azarin's pain came from seeing Asher in that broken state. And yet, he did not panic. He had no fear for Asher's life. He and his first son had already discussed the contingency plan to save Asher. That discussion had led to this last-minute change to the marker's function. They watched as Asher, somehow, rose to his feet. His legs were already trembling, threatening to give out. His entire body shook with exhaustion as he staggered forward, eventually collapsing behind the trunk of a tree. They watched, hearts bleeding, as family tradition and ancient law bound them to their chairs like invisible, invincible chains. The Wargraves could never fall to a human enemy without consequence. But now, it seemed even tradition had betrayed them. Malric was already prepared to move the moment Asher reached the point of death. He hadn't interfered even now, just in case the youngest still had one final card to play. They watched as the axe-wielding assassin strode confidently toward Asher, who was panting like his very life depended on each breath. Then, their eyes widened in shock. Asher's injuries were healing, right before their eyes, with no blood. They watched as Asher moved instantly with unbelievable speed, burning through the last drops of his stamina. They watched as his rapier took care of the axe-wielding assassin, while Asher himself personally eliminated the talkative assassin leader. Before their shock could even settle, they watched Asher raise his middle finger toward the remaining assassins, with a cheeky smile, before vanishing in a streak of silver light. They didn't fully understand what that middle finger meant, but their shock ran deep. The youngest Wargrave had just vanished. Their eyes remained fixed on the heads-up display. It adjusted a moment later, repositioning itself to show Asher's new location. And once more shock, they recognized the place. And in that moment, smiles and grins spread across their previously expressionless faces. The youngest has a teleportation ability. The thought echoed in all of their minds. They didn't know the limits of that ability, how many times he could use it, how far it could go, but in that moment, none of them cared. In a flash of silver streaks, Asher and Virilis appeared on the branch of a tree. The very moment they reappeared, Asher collapsed to his knees as his body completely gave out. He had been in peak, constant movement for 2 full hours without rest, and now it showed. Immediately after their arrival, snakes, as usual, lunged at them, but Virilis wouldn't allow anything to get near Master. However, she didn't kill them, as Asher had ordered her not to. She simply severed the branches they were on, instantly dropping them to the ground. The snakes, startled and terrified, slithered away in fear. Asher's current location was the same spot where he had woken up at the beginning of the trial. It was the tree he had climbed for the first time, the place where he had killed the first snake. Unknown to all, Asher had left a position marker on that very tree, just in case a situation like this ever arose. The position marker allowed him to mark up to 3 different locations. His first was his room. Now, this tree had become the second. The third remained unspoken, reserved for another unknown contingency. Asher now laid on his back across the branch, panting heavily, his chest rising and falling with every breath. The last attack he made was nothing more than a gamble, one based entirely on the element of surprise. If it had failed, he had planned to teleport immediately, but it hadn't. It had succeeded. Asher stared at the pale moon in the sky above as he lay there motionless, like a fallen log. System, how much time is left? Asher asked mentally. 4 hours and 30 minutes. The system replied without hesitation, its voice calm and efficient. Over the past 6 months, while Asher had been grappling with the weaknesses in his ability, he discovered that blood was one of the major limitations. Without blood, Crimson Pact was utterly useless. But Asher had found something else. Virilis could also store the blood it drank. Virilis didn't necessarily need to use the blood she had consumed immediately. She could store it for future use, and this discovery had been critical. During his preparation for the true awakening, Asher knew that it would involve numerous injuries. He knew pain would be a constant companion. So, anticipating the worst, he made sure to fill Virilis with blood in advance, just in case something happened. And something had happened. That was why, earlier, when he stood up and hid behind the tree, it wasn't only to prepare an ambush. It was also to hide and heal, because if the assassins had seen him healing, they wouldn't wait and simply kill him instantly. This had been his trump card all along. Virilis could still heal him using the blood of fallen enemies, without tapping into her stored supply, which was exactly what she had been doing throughout the true awakening until now. Asher didn't yet know the full limit of Virilis' storage capacity, but to him, it seemed almost infinite. Virilis had been drinking blood non-stop for over a month without showing any signs of reaching her limit. I have an hour and a half to 2 hours to rest and recover, Asher thought, his gaze still fixed on the moonlight filtering through the forest canopy. Returning to this location was a strategic move. Although the assassins now knew where he was, they still had to make their way back here. And they had just spent 2 full hours chasing him at near full speed. That meant he had approximately 2 hours before they could return, unless they chose to sprint with all they had. But Asher knew better. Some of them might consider it, using Astra augmentation and abilities to cover the distance quickly, but doing so would be foolish. Upon arrival, they'd be exhausted, with stamina and Astra reserves nearly depleted or halved. So Asher was confident they wouldn't. Even if they spent 2 hours tracking him back here, they still had 2 more hours remaining to eliminate him. They wouldn't risk arriving completely drained. It was all calculated from the very beginning. Asher stared at the moon once more. He was slowly regenerating stamina, but if he wanted to reach his peak faster, he would need to do one thing: sleep. He weighed the decision he was about to make. To sleep in an enemy's domain, at his weakest state, surrounded by threats. It was reckless, but he had no other choice. His omniperception would alert him to anything nearby. Though it had weaknesses, it didn't mean it was useless simply because it wasn't infallible. And besides, Virilis was there, floating silently above him, like a quiet, ever-watchful guardian. Another thought crept into Asher's mind, and a faint smile formed on his lips. Then he lay down more comfortably and slowly closed his eyes. His mind drifted to the huge bed and feathered duvet back in his room. The temptation to teleport there just to sleep was overwhelming. After all, even as an orphan in his past life, he had never once slept in a forest teeming with assassins and wild beasts. He thought of Lyra, wondering how she was doing in this moment. But the thought was fleeting. It vanished just as a natural phenomenon called sleep claimed him. Even in this state of unconsciousness, his mind remained half-active. His ability, instinctive adaptation, seemed to reach its peak during such a moment. Virilis floated gently above Asher, her entire form humming like an ethereal sentinel. She was ready to shred anything that dared approach her master, to rip it apart down to the smallest atom. Deep within the forest, the assassins moved with agile and fluid motions. Their figures tore past trees, the world turning into a blur in their vision. Each step echoed with frustration and fury. They cursed beneath their breaths. They had waited so long for the 10th sun to reveal a second ability, only for it to turn out to be a teleportation skill instead of an offensive one. And what baffled them even more, they couldn't understand how the 10th sun still had Astra left. Their minds raced with questions. They concluded that the rapier had likely been gathering Astra for the teleportation earlier. That would explain it. Otherwise, why wait for that particular moment to gather Astra and teleport? Why not teleport at the beginning before the injuries had piled up? They wanted to increase their speed, to dash through the forest at maximum capacity. But they knew better. This was a battlefield. Anything could happen. They needed to conserve stamina. That was rule number one. So, they didn't use their abilities, nor did they tap into their Astra reserves. They estimated it would take an hour and a half to 2 hours to reach Asher's new location. But they weren't worried. They still had 2 hours left to kill him. In their minds, there was no way the 10th sun could recover in just 2 hours. Ironically, their thoughts aligned perfectly with Asher's own calculations and strategy. But the real question was, when the assassins finally arrived, who would they meet? Would it be the same Asher they had left behind, low on stamina, battered, barely breathing? Or would they meet something else entirely? Perhaps they wouldn't meet him at all. Beneath the shrouded canopy of trees in the stillness of the night, Asher lay motionless, fast asleep atop a thick branch, as though the weight of the world held no claim over him. His breathing was soft and steady, the gentle rise and fall of his chest barely noticeable in the moonlit gloom. If word ever spread of what Asher Wargrave, the 10th sun, was doing at that very moment, few would believe it. During the true awakening, a brutal ordeal where every Wargrave was fated to lose at least a limb, he had chosen to sleep, despite bearing what was widely known as the most harrowing trial. And at that very moment, the Wargraves who watched from afar could scarcely believe their eyes. None among them had ever dared attempt such a thing during their own trials. Sleeping during the true awakening was unthinkable. Quite simply, not a single one of them would have. Virilis remained still and vigilant. If she possessed eyes, They would no doubt be flickering restlessly within their sockets as she swept her gaze across the forest, tirelessly surveying every shadow and rustle. Time slipped by, and an hour and 20 minutes passed in silence. Then Asher stirred. With slow, deliberate movement, his body shifted upright. He settled into a seated position upon the branch and opened his eyes, calm and unhurried, as he took in the dark expanse of the forest around him. "System, how long was I asleep?" Asher asked silently. "An hour and 20 minutes, host." The system's response chimed crisply in his mind. They should be arriving any minute now, he thought, eyes narrowing slightly. Virilis began to hum softly as she floated around him, her movements inquisitive, almost anxious, as though silently asking if something was wrong. "I'm fine. Stop panicking," Asher murmured with a sigh. At his words, her humming quieted, gradually fading into a soft, contented resonance. He took a moment to assess his condition. His stamina had returned, not fully but well enough. It was more than sufficient for what was to come. "My Astra has finally recovered," he noted internally. His Astra veins were now overflowing with Astra, as he had only needed to recover only 70%. "Even Virilis Astra has recovered," his thoughts continued. Asher dropped from the tree with fluid grace, landing soundlessly as his feet met the forest floor. The mist coiled around him, thick and restless, shifting like a living thing eager to consume all that dared enter its domain. He knew the assassins would arrive soon, and he had no intention of running. There was no point in hiding, not that he could, even if he tried. Though he had only left 3 assassins behind before falling asleep, Asher was certain more had arrived during his rest. Reinforcements, no doubt. But it didn't matter. Their numbers were irrelevant. It changed nothing. The outcome was already decided, at least in his mind. As if reality itself had heard his thoughts, a volley of throwing needles suddenly cut through the mist, whistling toward him from the front. Asher didn't flinch. Virilis surged forward in a blur, her form flickering through the air like a phantom. With effortless grace, she deflected every needle, their sharp points scattering harmlessly to the ground. But the threat hadn't passed. Several assassins had already closed the distance under the cover of mist. Among them was the same woman who had slashed open Asher's chest earlier. Her twin daggers gleamed with deadly intent as she lunged, this time aiming for his throat. Still, Asher didn't call Virilis back. He had no intention of blocking. His body shifted smoothly, feet gliding across the earth with controlled grace. He moved like wind through tall grass, evasive, fluid, untouched. Each strike missed by mere inches, not because they lacked speed, but because he had already slipped past them. But the assassin was relentless. She moved in perfect tandem with him, her steps fluid, calculated, each motion devoid of hesitation. Her dagger struck only with purpose, never once aimed at a fatal point without intent. Every slash, every thrust sought to dismantle his combat prowess piece by piece, crippling his movement, dulling his reflexes. Eyes, brain, chest, lungs, legs, thighs. She targeted them all, but Asher saw through her as if she were an open book. Unlike before, when exhaustion had dulled his edge and robbed him of his movement, this time he could read her every move, and now he could respond. In the very next breath, Asher's hand blurred into motion as his legs surged forward, his fist already hurtling toward her abdomen like a thunderous echo. The assassin was caught off guard, her eyes widening at the sudden shift in his momentum. A sharp boom resounded as his fist landed, but Asher felt nothing, no resistance, no impact, no flesh, no bone. His hand passed cleanly through her. Her form dissipated into smoke. So this is how she passed through Virilis. Asher's mind raced, the memory flashing. This must be her ability. He recalled the earlier moment when she had injured him. The assassin instinctively stepped back, but Asher was already there, closing the distance in a flash. He had read her movement before she even made it. His leg whipped out in a sweeping arc, a low kick meant to destabilize. She leapt graceful and swift, evading it with ease. But the attack was a feint. In an instant, Asher's body surged upward, his fist snapping toward her head with lethal intent. The assassin shifted into her smoke form, attempting to slip through the strike, but this time it was futile. A surge of purple lightning danced across Asher's fist as it collided. The impact was immediate. Her body was launched backward, a blur of motion and pain, her scream torn away and swallowed by the roar of thunder that followed. Before her body could even touch the ground, the earth beneath Asher surged upward and twisted unnaturally, an attempt to trap him in place. Stone bent like muscle, clamping around his legs. But Asher shattered the restraint with a single step, his legs moving with effortless force. Yet that brief moment was all the opening his enemies needed. The hammer-wielding assassin was already upon him, the whip user trailing closely behind like a shadow. The wind cracked with violent intensity as the blunt side of the hammer cleaved toward his skull. Asher didn't block. He slipped past the strike with a fluid sidestep, his motion ghost-like, impossibly clean. In his hands, twin daggers gleamed, taken from the very assassin he had just dispatched. Closing in on the assassin's flank, Asher's hands moved with lethal intent, aiming to sever the enemy's wrist. But his omni-perception flared, catching the whip slicing through the air from his blind side. Without hesitation, Asher abandoned the strike. He launched into a series of 5 rapid backflips, each one precise, creating space between himself and the advancing duo. Off to the side, Virilis held her ground, keeping another assassin at bay with ruthless efficiency, preventing it from drawing close, even as the rest began to converge on Asher. Asher's breathing remained steady and controlled. His purple gaze swept across the battlefield, reading every movement, every intent, every heartbeat of the assassins encircling him. Then, slowly, a smile formed on his lips. He was enjoying this, far more than he would ever admit. His knees bent forward ever so slightly, his muscles coiled, as if ready to erupt like a spring, but before Asher could so much as move, his vision vanished, swallowed whole, as though the very world of Crymora had chosen to erase all color from existence. His body froze, muscles coiling in instinctive tension. The instant darkness claimed his sight. This has to be another ability. One of the assassins, he thought, his mind racing to keep pace with the sudden shift in reality. An ability that induced blindness would be dismissed by most as trivial, useless, even. But in Crymora, there was an old saying, "There are no useless abilities, only useless wielders." And now, in this moment, that saying rang true. To strip a combatant of their sight at the height of battle was no mere trick. It was a death sentence cloaked in simplicity. Even seasoned warriors, honed by countless battles, could be reduced to prey with a single, well-timed use. No matter their experience, no matter their instinct, blindness, when wielded with efficiency, turned veterans into helpless fish laid bare upon the butcher's board. It's not a mind-based ability. If it were, the system would have nullified it, Asher reasoned, his thoughts sharp despite the sudden loss of sight. The assassins didn't hesitate. They knew each other's abilities as they all came from the same organization. They all pushed forward with immense speed, weapons raised with lethal intent. But Asher was no ordinary opponent. Under Aloan's relentless guidance, he had refined his omni-perception through 6 months of rigorous motion and balance training. He had fought blindfolded, disoriented, even with his perception sealed, forced to survive with nothing but instinct and muscle memory. Though deprived of sight, Asher could still see. His omni-perception unfolded around him, painting a detailed image of his surroundings within its radius. Whatever ability had robbed him of vision, it could not suppress what lay deeper, his cultivated sixth sense. System, notify me the moment this ability fades. Affirmative, host. With that thought, Asher closed his eyes. Almost instantly, he felt the air shift, attacks rain down from all directions, targeting nearly every inch of his body. Deadly strikes meant to overwhelm and dismember. But Asher was no fool. He wouldn't waste his strength trying to block them all at once. Instead, Astra surged through his legs. With a single, fluid motion, his figure blurred, vanishing from his position and reappearing meters away in the blink of an eye, his body gliding backward as if reality itself had bent to accommodate his retreat. The assassins, momentarily taken aback by the evasion, didn't falter. Confusion flickered in their movements, but it passed quickly. In the end, it didn't matter. Asher was still their target. Asher refused to give them the initiative. This time he moved. In a flash, he erased the distance between them, as if space itself had folded at his command. The dagger in his grip swept forward with clinical strokes, slicing clean through the eye of the nearest assassin. A scream burst from the man's throat, sharp, panicked, but it was cut short a heartbeat later. Asher's blade followed through, gliding across his neck in a seamless arc, silencing him with a single, elegant stroke. Blood sprayed into the air, but Asher was already gone. His movement was serpentine, fluid, and unpredictable. He twisted to the side, momentum coiled into his next strike. In one swift motion, his dagger flashed upward, burying itself beneath another assassin's chin and erupting through the top of their skull. With a dull thud, two bodies collapsed to the ground. Asher moved like a shadow, silent, swift, and devastatingly precise. He never needed more than a strike or two. Every motion was calculated, every kill clean. To any onlooker, the roles would have seemed reversed. Asher didn't resemble the hunted. He was the predator. The assassin, not the target. Behind their masks, the remaining assassins frowned. Confusion crept in, sharp and unwelcome. He was supposed to be blind, crippled by the very ability they deployed. Yet here he was, navigating the battlefield with fluid grace, as though sight had never left him. And then there was his weapon. He was known to wield a rapier. Now, he carved through them with a dagger, as if it had always been his blade of choice. None of it made sense, and that made him all the more dangerous. As Asher tore across the battlefield, the massive hammer came crashing down once more. This time, he didn't dodge. Instead, he shifted subtly, seizing one of the assassins and hurling him straight into the weapon's path. With a sickening, bone-crushing impact, the hammer collided. The assassin's head exploded into pulp, reduced to little more than a red smear in the air. The hammer-wielding assassin faltered, caught off guard. But by then, it was already too late. Asher was behind him. His eyes remained closed, his breath calm, his steps ghostly in their silence. In a blur, his hand moved, clean, deliberate. A flash of steel, a soft whisper of flesh parting. Then, the assassin's head soared into the air. Before it could hit the ground, Asher felt the whip cut through the air once more, its intent murderous. His body responded instantly. Feet lifted from the earth, he spun, pivoted, and lashed out with a kick that met the airborne head mid-flight. With brutal force, it rocketed toward the whip-wielding assassin like a macabre projectile. Seeing the severed head hurtling toward her, she had no choice but to retract her whip and evade, the motion sharp and instinctive. But Asher was already in motion. His legs carved through the soil beneath him as he surged forward, relentless. From behind, he sensed the whip lash out again, curving toward him like a serpent intent on devouring its prey. He didn't hesitate. With a burst of momentum, he leapt into the air. His body twisted mid-flight with fluid movement, a dancer's grace wrapped in a killer's intent. He landed behind her in a single, silent motion, deft, controlled. His daggers flashed forward, twin arcs of silver, aiming straight for her back. But she was ready. Her figure blurred, reacting with speed honed through countless battles. She didn't dodge, she attacked. The handle of her whip reversed course and shot toward Asher's neck like a striking fong, aiming to bring him down with her now that he had closed the distance. But Asher had seen this technique before. The Black Panther had used it. And no matter who wielded it now, it wouldn't work on him a second time. His movement shifted with fluid precision. He stepped back, posture calm, but the air around him crackled with rising tension. Lightning surged into his palm, forming a spear of concentrated energy. In the next instant, it launched, an arrow of purple fury tearing through the air with blinding speed and raw force. The assassin barely registered the thunderclap in her ears before the searing light struck her chest. A heartbeat later, it detonated, an eruption of power that consumed her in a flash, tearing her body apart like a balloon under pressure. Nothing remained but fragments, scorched and scattered in the air. Asher could already feel the shift in the air, the faint tearing of space as the assassins moved. They didn't hesitate. No words, no pauses, just pure lethal intent. His hand closed around the fallen whip, instinct guiding his grip. In his mind, the memory replayed how the assassin had wielded it earlier, the flow, the weight, the range. His battle intuition ability filled in the rest. Lightning crackled across the length of the whip, veins of violet energy pulsing through it like a living thing. Then Asher moved. His arm blurred, and the whip lashed out in a storm of arcs, slicing through the air in a sweeping dance of destruction. The assassins reacted instantly, forms flickering as they stepped back, vanishing from the whip's immediate reach in bursts of speed. But not all of them were fast enough. 3 were caught in the tempest. The whip struck, blunt force laced with elemental wrath. Their heads burst like overripe fruit, exploding into sprays of crimson and shattered bone, painting the air with gore. For a brief, morbid second, the battlefield gained a flash of color, blood red against a world painted in death. From the lingering haze of smoke left in the wake of his last strike, Asher emerged, his steps slow, deliberate. Each footfall echoed like a war drum in the ears of the surviving assassins, steady and unrelenting, as though heralding the end. The host's vision has returned. The system's chime rang clearly in his mind. Asher's eyelids lifted. In that instant, Virilis, who had already claimed the lives of 4 assassins, vanished from where she stood, then reappeared in her master's hand as if summoned by will alone. The air grew heavier. The hunt had truly begun.